that from underwater today. All right. Scott, why don't you start us off with a word of prayer this morning?
Sure. Father, we thank you for the snow. We thank you for loving us and giving us life. We thank you, dear Lord, for your Son and his blood that allows us to come boldly before the throne of the Almighty God. We thank you for that honor. We thank you, Lord, for forgiving us, for helping to watch over our children. We ask you to watch over our children, watch over our families, watch over all those that are on the roads today. Help them to get where they're going safely. Help us all, Father, to keep you in mind as we go through this life. Help us to honor and glorify you with all the things we do. Help us to remember that your Son is our Savior. In Jesus' name, amen.
Amen. All right, we were talking about the interview, and we had gotten, I believe, down to tenure issues. Is that about where your notes end?
Understanding concerning primary work responsibilities. That's the last thing I got.
Tenure issues, and then I don't think we'd started time
Oh, yeah.
matters.
Okay, you're right. That's
Okay.
Point 8.
Now, under tenure, just to make sure that we were comprehensive there, it's a good idea, and this is not necessarily something that happens in the interview process. If you can find the information out some other way, it's good. But I'd like to know how long the preacher has been staying there. There are different challenges. One of our graduates, Travis Bookout, went to a congregation that had been changing preachers on average about once every 18 months. Now, that might give you some trepidation to go into a place that's got that kind of a carousel, but he was able to stay and do good work, and it changed the complexion of that work. Found out that some of it was the man. In some instances, some of it was they moved on and were looking for greener pastures or had, in their minds, better opportunities. So you don't always just run away when you see that kind of a statistic. But it can be a challenge. It can mean that there's some volatile personalities. It can mean that there's some very prominent people that are causing trouble. Now, the opposite's true as well. I would want to know, if they've had the preacher there for 25, 30 years, what's that going to mean to me? It's going to be a lot harder because he's buried and married a whole bunch of folks, hasn't he? And he's been there to kiss a lot of babies. So it's kind of hard to go in behind that, and it depends on the congregation. I think I've told you that the last 2 works I've gone into were following lengthy tenures, if you will, by the preacher prior to me, but both congregations were very gracious about that. And I've heard very little, brother so-and-so did this and was this way. So infrequently I can't remember if it has happened. So you certainly can go in behind that situation. I would be cautious if a preacher had been there for some time, was beloved or was influential and was staying. Because depends on the man. It's kind of like, can a preacher serve as an elder? Depends on the man. Can a preacher stay after he's been there and has been before the brethren and such an influence and has directed the programs of the church and been the spark plug? Can he sit on the sidelines and not be an armchair quarterback? Well, that's depends on the man. So there's really no way to know that until you maybe sit down with him and visit with him and see what kind of man he is. It's a risk, I'll just say that. And of course, you want to know what their concept is of how long the preacher should stay. You might, and with regard to tenure, this is just something you hope you never need, but it's something that you want to have an understanding regarding, and it's usually built in to most contracts, and that is notification of termination. What is your notification of termination? What's typical is 60 or 90 days. And a lot of that will be parallel to the workplace. Of course, you know how it is in the workplace, right? You can come in on Friday, and they can say, clear out your desk and give us any credentials you have, and we'll walk you out the door. And don't come back. That doesn't happen. At least I've never heard of that happen in the church unless it's just really an explosive situation. So normally, there's a very gracious period of time. Now, if you decide to move, unforced resignation we might call it, you owe the same courtesy to the congregation. You may be anxious to start that new work, but you owe them time because it may be a shock to them. In many cases, it will be. And they need time to undergo the process. Let me suggest this because I see it happening all the time. This is still under tenure. Don't resign until you have a place to move. You're so frustrated. You're aggravated by some things that just won't get resolved. They're not evangelistic. They're not active. Or there's a thorn in your side. Or there's so much pressure. I mean, any number of things that make you go, this is not worth it. I'm going to go somewhere else. Don't do that. A lot of guys do it. You say, well, Lord, take care of me. And He does. But some things we bring on ourselves and we have to reap the consequences of. And I've known preachers who have found themselves having to move in with their parents or move in with a friend, and 8 months later they're looking for a job. If they had been more wise, you think, I've endured this for some time, I can continue to endure this. To me, it seems like a bit of immaturity to move on before you know where you're going. So don't, but now you say, well, that's common sense. I saw today, well, I guess it was yesterday evening, where a guy did that. He left the congregation, and he doesn't know where he's going. I have no idea the variables, but I've seen so many cases where they just, it's up to here, you know, as Andy would say, I'm beat to the socks. You know, I got to get out of this situation. It's not wise. I think we talked about this, and we'll talk about this. You have this in the working agreement I gave you. But what are your primary work responsibilities? And there are just some very basic things. It's really some of the components of this class.
Neal, you know what?
Go ahead.
We're still on the time matter?
We're still under tenure. We haven't gotten to matters of time.
Oh.
So everything that we have said this morning since class started is under tenure. So I feel like I had kind of introduced the concept, but I hadn't really fully given it time, and we were probably rushing at the end of class. But you want to know what your primary work responsibility is, if there's any special areas. All right. That's all I have with regard to tenure. Any questions about what I've said regarding that? All right, now let's get on to time matters then. All right, here's some matters to bring up, maybe questions to ask. Number one, what is your practice concerning days off? This is maybe a cause for concern if they go, days off? Well, yes. Yes, sir. All right.
You know, one of the things I've always heard is that an evangelist, well, I don't want to answer that question at anyone, should not stay one place for a very long time. That's a big thought in the Caribbean. We believe that you should, once you get to a place, you get them to a certain point where they could move, especially, well, not with elders for sure. But once you feel comfortable, there's a point that they could function as themselves and get somebody else there. They would move to another congregation that is struggling. So they more or less see themselves as trying to help struggling churches to get on their feet. Mm-hmm. And that is a very predominant idea in the Caribbean.
And is this fed more by the preachers or by the congregation? It
is more or less fed by the preachers.
Okay. Well, now I would understand that you need to be aware of the culture in different places. But I would be interested to know how effective that's been. I know in our culture, it seems to be the longer that a man is at a place, the more influence he can have. I don't know what drives that. I have no idea if they just want to be able to preach at a lot of different places or if they are truly driven by the feeling that I need to help as many places as I can. I don't know. I do know. I'd be interested. Do you know of any places where a preacher stayed for any length of time?
I know of 3 places where they have been, as far as I can remember, they have the same preacher.
Okay.
And they're doing pretty good.
How those congregations?
They're doing pretty good. They're, as far as I know, they're the largest congregations that I know of, 300 plus members.
It may not be a coincidence. That may be. Now, I don't know if it would cause you to feel pressure if you go into a place, but by and large, if you can, it's good to have the concept of going to stay. Because I believe your influence will multiply as you stay there. Now, here's preachers. We can get those traveling, blues and be ready to go somewhere, and that might be on us. And we need to be. That's something we always need to pray about. And circumstances can change. I understand all that. All right. So, with regard to time matters, in secular work, typically they get Saturday and Sunday. You at least want one day. Now, if you can, 2 days off. If you have a family, especially, you want to be able to spend that time. Now, we talked about this before, didn't we, in the first part of the class? One of those days off at least is going to be a working day off, especially if it's Saturday, because you've got preaching and Bible class and all that tomorrow, the day after, and so you've got to prepare. And so it's not completely off, but you're not down at the office. You're able to do that on your time, in your blue jeans or your running shorts or whatever, you know. Yeah, exactly. Be flexible and ask for time to be approved if you need to be away. But if you need time off, you know, say you need 3 or 4 days, I'm not saying be secretive and keep everything under cloak and dagger, but you don't owe any man an explanation. If you need time, and I don't think many congregations or many elderships or many men's meetings are going to go, well, why do you need 3 or 4 days? Oh, if you're doing your work and you're active and they can see the fruits of what you're doing, just say, I just need a few extra days this upcoming week, and that's the end of it. That's kind of a good general rule of thumb. Remember we were talking about that Tuesday night? You've got game night with your family, and somebody calls, and sister so-and-so has itchy teeth, and, you know, they need you to come and hold her hand. You don't have to give an explanation. You've already got plans, and that's sufficient. Have an understanding about vacation. This is all with regard to time matters. Typically, in the beginning, you should have 2 weeks. Now, make sure that that's understood. That's 2 Sundays, if you can. Because preacher needs a break. You need to be able to just unplug from that. And take a vacation. It's good for your mental recharge. And it may be that you want to spend time with family, depending on how close or far you are. If you can, you know, it doesn't have to cost a lot of money. You can go camping or whatever. But just to spend some time away. And this is a good rule of thumb. Try not to hold seminars or meetings or speak at a congregation during vacation time. Take it off. Just be with your family.
So you're saying just be with your family?
Yeah. If that point was lost, be with your family.
Normally, if you're traveling, or if you decide to move to another island for vacation in the Caribbean, once they know you're a preacher, man, that's the first question they're going to ask you. So you have to cough it up and say no.
That's
You
right.
have to answer because they will ask you.
Yeah, thank them very profusely. Say, wow, what an honor. I appreciate it, but I'm not going to be able to today. I look forward to hearing a good sermon. So you can sit there and be a supportive listener. To take time off for continuing education, if that's a desire that you have. Maybe it's to come back here to go through the Masters or go somewhere else. I say here because you sure can get it cheaper here than you can other places. I know that as having pursued my Masters at another place as well. And what I would say in that vein, if that's an interest you have, is I would like to pursue my education, but not to the neglect of my work. They always need to know my first priority is local work. But if I can not neglect my work and continue my education, I would like to. Find out what their idea is about time off for lecture programs. There's great benefit to that. That's not something you're getting graded on. It doesn't go toward a degree. But you need to there are programs in our brotherhood like polishing the pulpit that are so practical. And you can get ideas for your local work to make you a better local man. You know, I think our lectureship does a great job of really giving you all kind of material on a book or on a subject that you can go back and you can preach. What's ideal is that the church would pay for that. I don't know our entire brotherhood, so I don't know how doable that is. But find out about it, and it'd be great if they can take care of that. Because it kind of compares to, you know, if you have anybody in your family that's a teacher, and they have what they call in-service training. Corporations will send employees to train on software or on different programs. Same thing. Just because you finish here at Bear Valley, greatest place I think to get trained to preach, that doesn't mean you got it all figured out. And you need more ideas, more help. Because we're lifelong learners. And that being the case, we're going to continue to learn. All right, number next, relationship to elders. This is assuming if you work with an eldership. Number one, will I attend elders' meetings? That's what's preferred, guys. Really. You're an asset to them. It helps you to be in the know of what's going on. You're not there as a decision maker. But certainly yours is a voice of influence. They'll want to hear from it.
At home, he has to be there.
Yeah, and I think it's the way it is. I mean, I've never asked. I've been to 95 to 98% of them.
Right.
In Virginia, it was somewhat optional.
Really?
Especially the longer I was there. They said, come if you want. But I wanted to be there. But it was nice to have something else going on that I could do that. But I would prefer to be in there. I want to be a part of what's going on.
So would you wait for them to ask you ask them, or you just be not expecting that you have to do it?
Yeah, in the course of the interview, this is where you're understanding policy ideas. I'd say, will I be attending elders meetings? And they'll say, they'll either say, yes or no, or they'll say, well, what do you want to do? Well, given that preference, I say, well, I'd like to be in there if it's okay. And they usually will be tickled pink by that. If you have a men's meeting, guys, the way it works is usually just you go. And you want to be there for sure because this is not the same as having an eldership. And so there's more diffusion, more diversity in men's spirituality, as we've already talked about. Emphasize the idea that you understand that there should be teamwork between the preacher and the elders. That you're on the same team. And some of this you just have to demonstrate in local work. Always be approachable. Don't be sensitive. Don't wear your feelings on your sleeves. If the elders ever come to you and say, hey, we'd like you to do this, or this really isn't being done to our satisfaction, can you do this? And if you're like, if you crumble at that, you're not going to last your preaching very long. Take that with grace. Be approachable. Because if you are, they'll feel comfortable coming to you with anything that's a potential problem. And I always want to be ahead of the curve. I want to know if there's any, like with my away schedule. God has opened doors of opportunity, and I get to go and speak different places. But I periodically check in with the elders, and I say, I want you to let me know if my being away is being harmful to the work here, in any way impacting it negatively. If you're hearing anything from the members, please let me know. I want to know proactively. See, I don't want to have to be in a reactive situation. So that's true of anything. If I'm not cutting it in the pulpit, or there's something about that, I'm talking about not talking about content. I'm talking about, I look at me. When I think about my preaching, I see all the holes. Certainly, speak too fast. Sometimes I can be too loud. I start up here. And I think that's born of my desire, my passion, but it can be a negative. Now, thankfully, I have a wife who is a good gauge and she'll tell me. But I also want to hear from elders. How are if it's in regard to that, or do we feel like I'm visiting enough? I'm conscientious about that, but I want to know. Hopefully, it's the things that matter. Am I evangelistic enough? You see, those kinds of things. So be approachable is the idea. Yes, sir.
Should you, plan to go be away, during your first year? Should you really, get into the groove before you start?
You're talking about with regard now again to vacation and that sort of thing?
Well, no.
Gospel meetings and that kind of thing?
Lectureships, whatever.
Probably. That's better kept to a minimum.
I mean, I would just think you would have to get to know where you're at first before you can really be away.
That's right. Now, what I did do when I came here was I let them know my schedule by the day they hired me. I worked out something. I don't know if I'm going to have a place in here. I don't remember dealing with that anywhere. But I had an understanding with the congregation about how many Sundays I could be away during the year. And an older preacher named David Sane was the one that gave me advice on this. He said, I have what I call a 6 Sunday rule. And the 6 Sunday rule, that's for all purposes. And so I'm going to tell you right now up front, at this stage in my preaching life, I've told you to do something that I don't practice. So I feel hypocritical, but I'm going to confess it to you. I don't miss Sundays for vacation. I know. I don't know how to get away from that because I typically I'm gone 6 Sundays a year preaching in Endeavor. But I do take my vacations. I do take time. I take a lot of mini vacations. That may work better in your schedule. 2 or 3 days here, long weekend here, Thursday, Friday, Saturday, that kind of thing. Like the 14th of March, I'm flying down to pick up a car for my son in Georgia, and I'm going to drive it back, so I'm going to have to miss Thursday. So that's a vacation day. It's Friday and Saturday, my days off. Lord willing, I'll get the car back here by Saturday evening. And so, you just kind of stick it in where you can. But there's logic to the 6 Sunday rule. Think about that. That's approximately 1 Sunday out of every 2 months. Okay, 1 out of 8. Not quite 1 a quarter, because that'd be 4. But once every other month that you're gone. And it certainly is helpful if you have men in the congregation, and you're trying to develop that anyway for their good. If you have men who can fill in your place, but that would be to attend a seminar, for continuing education like a PTP or the Bear Valley Lectures. That would include vacation. That would include anything that's not congregational related. So, example, if you go with the youth on a vacation Bible school campaign in another state, that doesn't count against your 6 Sundays. Why? That's the church's activity. You're going on behalf of the church. You're taking 10, 15, 20 people with you. If your kids are involved in Lads to Leaders, you're one of the chaperones, or you're helping to take care of that. That's kind of are you familiar with Lads to Leaders? Or LTC is another kind of the same kind of a thing. Well, if you go and you're gone on that Sunday, that doesn't count against your Sundays because it's a congregational related activity. But the 6 Sunday rule, and what you want to do is you want to spread that out in your schedule so that you're not gone, 4 Sundays out of 7. That's a bad idea because you will be missed, and it will impact your local work. That's probably enough to say on that.
And Neal,
yes, sir.
You go, say, you leave Thursday, and you say you get back with that car on Saturday evening, like you've proposed. When you get back Saturday evening, you already know what you're going to talk about Sunday morning. The next morning.
Definitely. That's a good point.
You've already got it down, and you're not worried about it.
You have to prepare for a situation like that. You've got to double up your work.
Yeah.
And that's why I chose that date. If I was still teaching preachers work, it'd be very difficult to do that. And so I prepare ahead. If I'm going on vacation, I think you guys weren't here yet. Maybe you were. Yeah, at this point. My wife and I, for our 20th anniversary early, I went to Rome, Italy. I used miles I had piled up for mission trips. I felt really proud of that. We did that whole thing for a week for less than $1,000. Wow. That's everything. Oh. And so what I did was I got the earliest flight out on Monday morning, and I got the latest flight back on Saturday night. But I had my Bible class and both sermons locked and loaded. And it did mean on those 8-9 hour flights that I was going over my notes. That's okay. That's all right. We had a great time. We saw the Colosseum, and we saw, where they had Paul in prison, and we saw, the groves and all of that. We did all that stuff. Lido by the sea, Osteo Lido, or whatever they call it. But when I got into those, I got up earlier than my wife. I always do. I'm a morning person. I'd go over my notes. And so, you work that out, and you're prepared ahead of time. I'd already done some preparation. Certainly had written the sermons, and I knew my Bible class material before I left.
But like on Thursday, Friday, Saturday, do you ever just intermittently just look at it or go over it, or do you?
I do. I'm going to tell you something I do that I'm never, ever going to recommend, but I do it. Is I go over my sermon periodically while I'm driving. Well, I should have hit pause on that. But I don't sit there and read my sermon.
I can just see it.
Yeah, I'm going over it. Now, I may have my notes at hand so that I can get an idea, very occasionally, but I'm going over that so I can absorb the material.
Yeah, driving.
Besides, I'm by myself for, you think this is a 20-something hour trip.
Yeah.
It breaks up the time. It's a good mental engagement to do.
Yeah. Driving is kind of like running. It's a time that you can think.
Absolutely. I agree with that.
I used to like record and play it in the car.
I have done that as well. That's probably a safer way to do that. I just don't like it as much. I don't know why. First of all, I don't like to hear me talk. I feel so sorry for you guys. You got to listen to me every day. I can't stand to hear my voice recorded. So I come up with other ways, but that's a good, effective way to do it, if that works for you. One other thing with regard to elders is I'm very frank to discuss my strengths and weaknesses. I think I told you about the interview with the congregation here earlier in this quarter. We had a congregational meeting at 5 o'clock, and I fielded everything from A to Z. And the one thing that didn't come up were what I perceived as my weaknesses. And so I talked about Bible classes and counseling, two areas I feel like I need to grow in. And I think that was helpful. I think, to be frank, not to project yourself as not seeing any weaknesses in yourself is not a good thing. Now, you can take that too far. Don't be pseudo-pious about the thing, but do be frank about it. But I certainly want my elders to know how I perceive myself, because they're going to be able to perceive me too. So it's good to have a good understanding of yourself, to know yourself. That's what Paul says in 2 Corinthians 13:5. All right. And then with regard to the interview, there's a place for understanding or having an understanding concerning your primary work responsibilities. And here's how I would break it down. Study and preparation. No way around that. How do you quantify that? That's what you're going to be honing that craft for the rest of your life. Number 2, preach and teach. And this is not in any particular order. This is just to quantify them. So study and preparation, preach and teach, comforting. Well, what falls under that? That's funerals, huh? Visiting, funerals and visiting. But I give it its own bullet point too, so I'll come back to that. But that is certainly part of company. Probably the bulletin. If you're not actually doing it, you're supervising it. And you know, this is one of those things that's probably in the process of changing. I don't know how many years you guys will do a paper bulletin. It may be like books. Maybe it'll be something that comes in 2 formats, electronic and paper. We already do the electronic bulletin here. That will continue to take place, and it may come to the point where the oldest generation is very computer savvy, and they're going to be content to have it on their smartphone or who knows what the new technology will be, and you won't use a paper bulletin. You may have a QR code. People come in there and hit it, and then there's the bulletin right there. It may not be a bad idea if you institute that. But you'll probably, even if it's electronic, you'll still be supervising the process of doing it in most places. Number 5, visitation. Here's a concept for you. At the first blush, you may say, there is no way. But if you made 15 visits a week, now, so how do you accomplish that? Well, so that's what? That's basically 3 a work day, right? 3 on Sunday, or maybe you don't visit in between services on Sunday, and you do 4 a day during the weekday. If you go to the nursing home and Sally Mae is in room 106, and then Susie Q is in room 304, you've made that. And remember, now we'll talk about visiting. You don't have to be eternal to be immortal. You go in there, you're there 5 or 10 minutes. You talk to them, see how they're doing. You pray with them, and then there's 25 minutes. You've made 2 visits right there. And then you go right. Brother and sister so and so that are elderly shut-ins are 5 minutes away from that nursing home. You go by there, you go in there, visit with them, talk with them, and see how they're doing. And then on your way back, there's somebody that you're trying to get to a Bible study. Go by there and visit with them. Just 2 or 3 minutes at the doorstep. Say, hey, how are things going? Just wanted to let you know I'm thinking about you. Hey, did you have any questions from our last Bible study? No, looking forward to next Wednesday night, or right before church services, right after, whatever it is. And then boom, 4 visits, less than an hour, and you've probably taken a mental break from what you were doing in the office. If you do 15 visits a week, you know how many that is in a year? 600. 600 visits a year. Tell me what preacher's doing that. That's difficult. And you don't have, I don't have 600, I don't even have 200 members in the congregation where I'm preaching. Well, that takes in visitors, it takes in prospects, it takes in multiple visits to people during the year. You know, if Joe Schmo's in the hospital, you visit him 5 times, typically. If he's in there for a long, congestive heart failure or breathing problems, and he's in there for 2 weeks, you'll easily see him 4 or 5 times.
It always seems like there's friends of a friend of a friend. I mean, if you think you're going to run out of people, there's always somebody.
That's right. That's right. But let's say you only do half of that. 7 visits a week. That's 300 a year. And that will put you ahead of most people. But of course, that goes back to time management. But what kind of visitation? I put them into 3 categories. Hospital and shut-ins. Number 2, prospects. Now, in prospects, there's 2 types of prospects, aren't there? What's the type of prospect you think of? Prospects for what? All right, conversion. All right, so baptism. So we have non-Christian prospects. But you have others. You have prospects for placing membership, those that are already Christians who've moved to the area or whatever. And then the 3rd category, and I'll confess this is probably the most unpleasant, is what I call delinquents. I don't know if you have a better term for that. The falling away. You could go into a local work, and you could make that one of your goals in that first year, is I'm going to get a list from the elders of every member who's no longer coming here. I did that. You guys don't know Sam Kennedy. He died. He was an elder that was here. It was one of the elders that hired me. And Sam, I so appreciate this. He had one of those Buick Centuries. And I would just look out the door, and about 10 o'clock every morning, he would show up. And I'd see that car out there, and I'd just walk down the stairs, and Sam was waiting, and we'd go out, and we'd make 1 or 2 or 3 visits. I got into the home of every single delinquent member of this congregation, probably in 6 months, thanks to Sam. And that was very fruitful. We had some folks restored as a result of that. You guys, they've moved on now, but Dave and Alice Halata, that was the result of going and visiting. And I give him all the credit in the world as being a shepherd. And that's, you go into a new work, and it doesn't matter what they say. They might say, oh, they'll never come back. Or, I wouldn't waste my time. What is it, 20, 30 minutes, and they have eternal souls? It's worth taking the time to go and do that. And they're not going to, unless they tell you, don't go do it, then, head out there. You never know what kind of fruit that'll bear. So that's another area of your work. And then you need time to plan and promote the work. You're going to be generating ideas, with regard to a visitation program, with regard to a fellowship program. With an evangelistic emphasis, we did when we started thinking souls. We had some the devil made sure that we had some speed bumps on that road, and in some ways we're still trying to recover from that. But as a part of that, you don't just say, all right, we're going to start emphasizing think souls. We had a prayer meeting. We had a newsletter that we did with that. We started again the New Christians class. We had an Evangelism 101 and then an Evangelism 102 class. The 101 was to share concepts and methods. And the 102, we did a how-to. It was interactive. We had goals that were set. We had all of our events were geared toward evangelism. That takes time. You don't just roll that out. When I was given the responsibility of directing the lectureship by the school, I did the same thing in the congregation. That takes time. There's so many facets to that. So anything that you're doing in helping the work to develop is going to take time. Image building. That depends. I think that happens better in a smaller community. And whether it's civic clubs or if your kids can be involved in activities, whether it's, and I try to always give guy examples, but like, they're taking piano or karate or, whatever. Those are ways to get exposed. This morning, one of the reasons I was a little late getting here, guy that I give Rob Turner the credit for this, he met this fellow. He's a commercial painter, and Rob helped him with some form on some machines in the gym. And so Rob very quickly said, I want you to meet my preacher. And so I met him. His name is Matt. And I see him as one of those folks that you say hi, as you're going around. Well, this morning he came up to me and we started talking. We talked for probably 20, 25 minutes. He's looking for a church home. Now, I'm not saying, I've chosen a gym that's not a meat market. That can be a bad place to be, really. But, people seem to typically be there to actually work out, And so it's been a good place to meet prospects. I've talked to several folks, and we've had actually some to come and visit. Hadn't resulted in conversion yet, but what are we doing? That takes time. And that's, our boys have been involved in sports and Boy Scouts and those kinds of things through the years. Counseling is another area. And then be a people person. I don't know how you qualify that, but you're going to be among the people. Fellowship activities. You're going to go to youth activities. There's just all different ways. All right, and then the last area is miscellaneous matters. Here's some things I want to make sure are discussed somewhere in the interview process. I don't think there is any reason why you shouldn't ask that eldership, if it's an eldership, or the men, if it's a men's meeting, or if it's a preacher's committee you're speaking to, whether or not it's an eldership, whoever makes the decisions in the congregation. I want to know, what are your future plans? And this isn't a deal killer necessarily, but I'll tell you what will favorably impress me is if they have a vision, a goal for where they're going. And then I ask myself, do those goals jive with Scripture? Are those goals that I think are worthy and serious and insightful and have the chance to be productive? Because if somebody says, well, we'll meet here on Sunday morning and we'll have worship, and then we'll come back on Sunday night and we'll worship again, and then we'll come back on Wednesday night and have Bible class. That's your plans for the future. Yeah, that's pretty much it. Well, I hope for a little more than that, I also want to know, what are the local difficulties? Just, if you're not hair trigger and they don't think you're going to run away, and try to assure them, that all churches have problems. And you don't expect there'd be an exception because they're made up of people and people are imperfect. So reassure them. There's problems. Just as a preacher, it's good to know up front what they are. Now, in the course of that, you might find out about some explosive situations. There's two families here that got about 20 members apiece, and they can't stand one another. And they are at each other's throat all the time. I don't think an eldership's going to be that honest with you, but if that were to come out, that's something I might want to give some pause to before I go and get in the middle of it. If you're a good peacemaker, and you feel like you can overcome that may not be a deal killer to you. Is there basic harmony? And that might open up discussion. It might be, you might want to try to think of an open-ended way to talk about that. Tell me about what kind of harmony exists here. And then see what that'll yield you. And then, of course, just very practical, if they don't tell you, it might be helpful as you close the interview process and say, when will we get together concerning a decision? Or when might I expect to hear from you? Oh, we got 3 other candidates coming in. Or you're the last one. We're going to talk about it. If it goes very well, it might be they say, well, you're the guy we want. And then, now what do you do if somebody offers you the job in the interview? I'm talking about the whole weekend. You preach, you teach Bible class, and things go so well, you're such a good match, and they say, well, we'd like to offer you the job. What do you say? Let's say that you feel very favorable about this position. Do you say, oh yeah, I'll take it? I don't advise that. I would advise you tell them, well, we're very excited about the prospect of this. This seems like a great work. But you'll understand if I want to sit down with my wife and pray about this. When do you need a decision? Well, ideally they'll say, you take your time, a week, 2 weeks, or whatever. And if they really want you to come, they'll give you the time. And then do that very thing. Get together with your, even if your wife has been in the interview with you, as mine has been in the last 2 works I've been at. Even if that's the case, you don't want to make a decision without having, you're in that room. You need to go apart and talk. Even if you're not married, you and the Lord still need to go and talk about it. All right, I would just right here. One other thing, I don't know that I have it anywhere else. As soon as you make a decision, let's say you're moving to point B, you need to have a discussion with the leadership where you're leaving, if this is not a first job, before word gets out, as best as you can. It's a small world, especially in our brotherhood. But if I accept work B, I'm going to go back to work A. And the first thing I'm going to do is, and it's hard, guys. Even if it wasn't a great work, it's hard to sit down and tell guys that you're leaving to go somewhere else. And you need to tell them before you tell the congregation. Yes, sir.
But this is in light of you told them you're going to go interview. They already know you're looking to leave.
That brings up a great point. How do you handle that? If you are given, let's say you're doing good local work and somebody calls you from point B, and they say, we'd like you to consider this work. You haven't sent a resume in, they contact you. And by the way, I think that works better. Let's say that the work where you are is a work that you're going to be there, you're going to be a yeoman, you're going to do the work, but you see long term it's not going to be a good fit, that you want to go somewhere else. I would talk to somebody, in your case, I would talk to whoever it is, if it's John Warnes or Denny or somebody, say, I think I'm doing good productive work where I'm at and I can stay here, I'm not having to move. But if you hear of a good opportunity, send them my way. And have it works better if a congregation contacts you in that regard. And a lot of times it will, unsolicitedly. You'll get a phone call. And then, I think you always listen. There's such a thing as loyalty. But if somebody calls you to ask about your interest in going to that place, listen to what they have to say. And then talk to your spouse if you're married. Pray about it. And then if it goes further than that, then you got to decide how I'm going to handle this. If you don't tell the leadership where you are about the other opportunity, and it hits them out of the blue, that's going to be pretty hurtful. You want to leave that work as well as you can. But now, here's the risk you run. Just be aware of it. If you go to point B and you have no assurance of how that's going to go, you may, I forget the way it's put. This is my first work I did. I told them that I was going to go and interview at Cold Harbor. And one of the men said, well, the charm's broken. So what he's saying is, we know you're not happy here. That's the way he interpreted it. We know that you don't want to stay here. Well, let's say I go up to Cold Harbor and it doesn't work out, and they don't want me, or I go, whoa, this isn't the right kind of work. I go back down to Church A, and I say, well, I'm going to continue to work here. Well, they might say, oh, good. Or they might say, no, don't think so. So you realize you run that risk when you are going from place to place, or if you go interview somewhere else. If I talk to somebody on the phone, I don't think I have to tell them that, if they call me especially. If it's something where that you're not sure, can you have a gospel meeting with them, set it up and go and speak with them that way? Is there an ethical issue there? I think this is not situation ethics. I think you need to look at your work. You'll know the nature of the work where you're at to know whether or not you need to tell the leadership up front. When I was at Cold Harbor, and that's the best way not to answer it, because I'm kind of like Brad. I've not been in this situation very many times. So take this with a grain of salt. But when in 2003, the Keith Sargent family, they had and our family had given thought to being missionaries in Tanzania. And so I went to my eldership and I said, brethren, I'm not saying this is what I want to do, but you know I love mission work. And they've been with me on mission trips. I said, I want to look at the prospect of going into full-time mission work. And so I asked them, and two of the elders accompanied me over there. And we went through that process, and for reasons I don't have time to go in here, ultimately I decided I wanted to stay. And I stayed at Cold Harbor another 2.5 years. And so they were aware of that. I did not want to break their heart if I didn't know. So when it came time for the Bear Valley, then also keep in mind, had a great relationship with the elders, great relationship with the church. When I came out here and was asked, I just said I needed the time. I didn't say it was a meeting. I just said I've been asked to come out and speak. So I went out there. I came back. They offered me the job here on that Sunday. I went back and I flew back on Monday and got back late. Tuesday night I had a meeting with the elders. They knew. It was the most painful thing, by the way, I've ever done in my preaching life. But I gave them the letter and I read it to them and I talked to them. And they were smiling. I was shedding tears. And they were very supportive and encouraging. Because it made, the reason I was wanting to go from there, if it was a local work, that local work is as good a work as I can imagine being. But guys, I've always liked preacher training. And they knew that. And I had done a lot of things toward that end. And this was an opportunity to be involved in preacher training. And they understood that. And they were very supportive. They were friends. And so we made a decision that way. I didn't mean to go off on that tangent except to say you need to know the local situation. I think as a rule, it's better to let them know before you go. But keep in mind that your faith is going to grow because you're going to put yourself squarely into the hands of God when you make a decision like that. And if you're trying to serve Him, He's going to take care of you through that. And what happens in the end, He'll produce the greatest good. Yes, sir.
Can you, in your interview, let them know what you like, what your special interests are? I mean, just so you know.
Oh, absolutely.
Like you just said, preacher training. You know, well, I'm really interested in this.
Yeah.
That way, that would at least they could see the writing on the wall there, maybe.
Well, and here's the thing. I went there when I was 24, and I left there when I was 36.
Oh, shit.
A person changes who they are in that period of time. But I did. I'd always had a passion. I had a Timothy class all the time. I had a homiletics class, and they enjoyed that. That was, I don't know how many times I had a Timothy class, and it's basically homiletics for teenagers. And then I had, for adults, I had a homiletics class as a special class on Tuesday night. Had guys and girls in that, because the girls wanted to know how to teach better Bible classes, that kind of thing. And it was great. It had 10, 15 people in there. And several of the elders went through that. And so they could kind of see that was an interest of mine. Even the Pew Packers class was always, that was always an interest. And then the Lord opened that door here. I've been doing FPTC. The youth minister left, and I've done it every year I've been here. Every summer I've been here. And so a lot of that takes care of itself as you relate to people. But you've got to be very wise. And what you always want to do, and this goes way back to what Brad asked originally, is you want to do what's best for the church, where you are. What do you want to do? You want to leave the church better than you found it. You want to do whatever you can to keep from hurting the church where you are. And you're going to know your circumstances. But I wouldn't tell them every time somebody called me and said, hey, would you be interested in coming here? Because you guys are going to do great work, and that's going to draw interest and the attention of others. All right, that's all I have on interviewing. So what questions do you have? What do you feel like wasn't covered? Or that you have a question about remaining? Think about it. We'll come back to it if we need to. But I want to talk about beginning the work. Let's say you've been hired now. What happens next? All right. Before we get to that, let me just introduce a couple of things. They call it the honeymoon period. Well, how long does the honeymoon period last in your local work? Let me ask you this, you guys that are married. How long does the honeymoon last in your married life? Don't answer that out loud necessarily. And maybe maybe it cheapens it to say that the honeymoon can go on for 50 years. But in its place, something more profound and deeper occurs after the honeymoon. As you know each other better and you still love one another. I don't know how long it lasts. Hopefully it smoothly transitions into love and respect. But the word honeymoon implies a lot of things, doesn't it? New and exciting. Temporary. I don't know about you guys. We went to Gatlinburg, Tennessee for our honeymoon, and we spent 6 days total. And then honeymoon's over. We drive back and start local work. Honeymoon only lasts so long. And then number 3, it implies a lot of work to follow. But after the honeymoon, it can get better, day after day. All right, so here's some things to keep in mind when you start a new work. Number 1, go slow. Don't try to change everything. Keep this in mind. It took them 25 years to get the way they are, or 50 or 75. You're not going to change that overnight. Some things don't need to change, but the things that do need changing, be patient. Go slow. You know what happens if you don't? You can earn a lot of suspicion and distrust. They're going, who is this guy? He doesn't even know us, and he's coming in here and he's trying to foist all these changes on us? No, thank you. And you actually minimize your influence. So go slow. Number 2, do not start what you will not and cannot keep going. Give some thought. Be deliberate to what programs that you're going to start and when you're going to start them. So how do you factor that in? Number 1, you need to get to know the congregation. They have habits, they have traditions. Get to know those. So this implies time. It's going to take some time. But also learn the pace of your daily and weekly schedule. That's important. My first work was with a congregation of 60 people. They were all family. The pace was completely different. I moved to a congregation of about 110, and it grew over time to about 160, 170. Completely different pace. But I go from that to a church of 300, where shortly after I was hired, I was the only preacher. The pace is a lot different. And so what you try and attempt in that setting is different than that church of 60 where you have all the time in the world to develop your writing, to start projects, to whatever it is. So you'll know the pace of your daily and weekly schedule. So don't bite off more than you can chew, I guess is another way to say that. Number 3, exercise hospitality. Eventually have all the elders over. If you have co-workers, have them into your home. We've talked about the alphabet game, right? Having the congregation over a few letters at a time. What happens eventually? You get everybody into your home. There are sometimes things that come along that challenge that, but that's a good rule of thumb. Number 4, avoid quick friendships. I think we discussed that in Meet the Congregation. But you sometimes need to exercise caution with this yourself. You might feel compelled, you might like a certain person or family pretty quickly. But what you need to do is take time to learn people and character. Because sometimes you may learn some things that you're still going to love them and you're still going to minister to them, but you don't want them to be in your inner circle of friends. What's a chronically negative And then they're just all, and you don't get that at the first impression. When you spend some time with them, they're just, or maybe they're bitter or sarcastic people. I don't want that in my inner circle of friends. Or if they have moral values or worldliness that that doesn't jive with your values. Sometimes, see, you got to get to know people. Number 5, be visible. There's nowhere that says that you need to go back to the back after you preach. But why do you do it? I mean, you don't see Paul do it. You don't see Peter do it. So why? Is that just one of those traditions? It's kind of like cutting the roast that ends off the roast? I mean, why go back to the back after you preach?
Well, to talk to fellowship. I mean, you're talking about meeting with the congregation in the back.
Yeah, going to the back after you preach. Can't you do that from the front?
Sure, but you're not going to get it. You're not going to get everybody.
Yes,
Everybody's going to see you. You're going to see more people in the back.
Well, that's what we're talking about. It's visible. If people are going to be looking for you, that you don't know they're looking for you. And it may not be the people up front. So if you go back to the back, you're visible. I go, oh, I know the preacher. I know where the preacher is, so I know where to find him when it's done. Now, who will you not see if you stay up front?
Those who listen early or rushing out.
Every church has the rushers, and they're out immediately. There's some they're so anxious to get out that they'll leave during the closing song. And sometimes there's medical reasons. It's not always that they're antisocial, but I want to catch those people, so I'm gonna go back to the back. Who else is going to be heading back there?
Visitor.
My visitors, people who are there for the first time, Christian or non-Christian.
I remember you haven't seen for a long time.
Yeah, that's right. Now, you may find yourself in a situation like we have. There's like 87 doors to get out of this place. So I go to the back, and if they're looking for me, they know where to find me because I can't go to every single place. But also, you need to be seen in town, at the hospitals, in the community. So you need to be visible during the week as well. Number 6, watch your sermon selection. And again, the word we've been saying all quarter long is balance. Balance is the key. So what do you preach when you first go to a place? Fundamentals, general, great subjects of the Bible, things that every congregation would need. You'll have time, and I think we've mentioned this before, you probably don't go in and preach on Matthew 19:9 the first Sunday that you're there. Not that there's anything wrong with that. Take time.
It's a moving sermon.
It can be. And the thing is, you need to earn their trust first. And know that they love you and that you're not a hothead, you're not, flying off the handle, you're not issue-oriented. And so you preach, as was said, well, the fundamentals. The inspiration of the Scriptures. Now, that shouldn't be a moving sermon. That ought to be. If you've done your work in the interview, speak of the power and the authority of the Scriptures. That's going to tell the church a lot, right? But I'm not moved by the culture to preach. I'm not moved by what's popular. I'm moved by what the Bible says.
Evidences.
Preach on evidences.
This is why I believe.
Yeah.
This is why you should believe.
Absolutely. Those are the kinds of the church. Its mission. Its its work. Its growth.
Its uniqueness. Right?
Yeah, its uniqueness. Bible characters. Preach through the Sermon on the Mount. I mean, preach to the 7 sayings on the cross. Preach to the 7 churches of Asia and Revelation.
You've been looking at my
Hey,
plan.
If that's your plan, that's a good plan. That will bode well. Because you can go there in the first year, and man, that's going to feed the church. That's going to be spiritually helpful. And yet, it's the basic stuff that people need. All right, number 7, avoid issues in the beginning. We've just said something about that. 2 words will help you very well, or a word in the phrase. Wisdom and common sense. Common sense takes care of a lot of stuff. And I would say it takes a minimum of a year, maybe 2, to to really learn what the church needs to work on. My assessment now, here, is different as I approach 7 years than it was when I first got here. So I didn't know it. Well, this is something, guys, that I have not always done well with, but I'm learning. Be slow to speak. Not in the James 1 way. That's about Scripture. I understand that. But I had a grandpa who was a cotton farmer in Mississippi. And he was the E.F. Hutton of any room he was in. And the reason why was because he was deliberate. He listened. And he didn't waste words. He only spoke when he had something to say. I'll tell you somebody like that here. Maynard Woolley. Maynard is a listener, a contemplator. He is one who analyzes, and then he says when he has something to say. I'm a bit more like Peter than that. And so I've had to learn that, sometimes the hard way, to be slow to speak. To be quicker to listen to what other people have to say and not fly off the handle, or not even necessarily that, but just get the mouth in motion before the brain is fully engaged. That gets you into a lot of trouble. Number 9. And then here's where, let me give you this. This is where it has practical application. When people come up to you and either say something that might be provocative, or if they come up and they have an opinion about the elders, or the deacons, or the Bible class teacher, be very careful. Listen to them, handle it appropriately, but watch your words. Number 9, avoid lengthy sermons. It's a good self-discipline. And as you know from your writing these articles, by the way, you guys have done a phenomenal job on these articles. I don't know how you have turned out. You've done the best of any class I've had at keeping those things around 300 words. Some guys just gave up. Some of them only did 150. Some did typically 600, but you guys are trying to get out. But you know, don't you, it takes longer to hit that target than if you just had free reign and could write me 1,000 words. You could get 1,000 words written quicker than the 300, and I recognize that. Same is true with our preaching. We need to do the honing and the refining before we get in front of them. I'm going to mention a book in chapel today. I'm one of the guys doing book recommendations. And there is a really good book. And this book's now a little dated. And what he said then is even more true today. And the book is by Timothy Turner. It's called Preaching to Programmed People.
Yeah, have you ever read that,
I
right?
think I have that.
Are you familiar with that book?
And Bob had us read that.
Yeah.
He might have. Because we both went through the master's program, and it was recommended to us years ago. But the thing about that is that people, and that book was written in the late 90s. You think about what's happened technologically since the late 90s. I mean, smartphones were not even thought of. The internet was still in its earlier stage. And Roku, and I mean, all these different, Netflix, all this stuff didn't exist yet. And you just watch a TV program sometime, not to necessarily for content, but watch what they do with lighting and cameras. And you'll notice every 5 or 10 seconds, constantly they're changing the angle, they're changing the lighting, they're zooming in, they're zooming out. All this is going on, and you don't know what that does to your brain, because when you watch TV or a movie, you're passive. You're not engaged. All right, so you're receiving information. Now, what happens in the preaching process? It's an active process. You can't, now a lot of times we become passive because we're saying, entertain me, make me feel, and that's a part of that, that the message should do that to us. But if we're programmed to be passive, then now that's the environment we go into when we preach every Sunday. And we're trying to hold attention. Now, there's a certain part of that can't change. But if you preach a 45-minute, lecture-style sermon where you just, and the dust comes out of your mouth, if people are disconnected to you, don't be surprised. But in that kind of world, that's the challenge we face. Constant changing, lighting, and all of that. And it's good to help you get an idea. And I don't like his last chapter. I don't think I agree with it. But the idea is firmly there. And somebody said that the mind will absorb only so much as the seat will endure. If you go an hour and you're preaching, people have checked out. Why do that? Be concise, be effective, and preach as quickly as you can. I know I need to sometimes work on practicing what I'm telling you, but I typically 25, 30 minutes, that's about right. Don't be the guy that preaches 40 to 50 minutes unless, I mean, you know, if it lathers up really good, but most guys can't get away with that. And to have people's attention. I said that there are exceptions. I know there always are. But keep that in mind. Make sure you're the exception if you're going to do that before you do it. Number 10, avoid exaggerating. There's a fine line between trying to get people's confidence and overselling yourself. Be careful in trying to sell yourself to a congregation. You know, every church I've been to doubles in size. Ooh. You know, be careful if you're, you know, that may be met as a very, people may think that's pretty arrogant. I sat down, a fellow moved, I won't tell you where I was, but a fellow moved into the area, wanted to meet, eat lunch, and I mean everything. And I don't know, I had no reason, I don't know why he was trying to sell himself to me, but the church just exploded everywhere he went. Just did everything, you know, and people told him what a great preacher he was. I mean, he's telling me all this stuff, you know, and how effective a counselor he was, and you know, and I'm thinking, you know, if you really have to work that hard to sell yourself, your opinion must be pretty low. But the other thing is, there's no way he can meet that, can he? There's nobody who's that good. So the congregation will be evaluating what you say about yourself. So be careful about that. Don't oversell your accomplishments, your abilities, or your experience.
There'll be no problem there.
Well, what can you do instead?
now.
Just do it.
Yeah.
Let them see it, and then the works follow. Revelation 14:13. That's what happens with the dead that die in the Lord. That can happen to us while we're living and preaching. You know, you can do it. Let them see it. And the works follow. The fruit show. That's it. Actions speak louder than words. Number 11, keep your priorities straight. In ministry and at home. Be balanced. Number 12, kind of the opposite from what we said earlier, get into the homes of members. Here's what I recommend. Find an elder or deacon or member that's well respected and well loved in the congregation and go with them. If they're married and you're married, go as two couples. When we went to Virginia, one of the deacons and his wife, it was also our secretary, we got together and we went and visited in the homes of just about everybody in the congregation. And it made a difference that they were so loved and that they were widely received in the congregation. And that makes such a big difference when you do that. Number 13, don't forget the shut-ins, the elderly, and the widows. They are very easily forgotten. You won't have your name in lights for doing that, but it's a part of doing good, effective local work. And that's why you want to do it. And then finally, get introduced to people in the city as soon as possible. I had a preacher friend who went to a church in eastern Kentucky, and he had some very prominent members in the congregation. And through that, he was able to meet the mayor. He was able to meet the head of the local hospital, the chief of police, somebody prominent in the fire department, all of that, you know, the superintendent of schools. So, you know, that's good. All those represent potential doors. If you want to have an apologetic seminar, if you've met the superintendent of schools, you can say, hey, can we use your middle school? And it'll be a whole lot easier. Might not even charge you. So there's just so many advantages to that. We need to go into a situation when we move somewhere to work with a congregation, having the idea that we are going to stay. Move with the idea of staying. Keep in mind it's not always practical or possible. There will be situations where some just cannot be pleased. It's not you, it'd be anybody. You remember, and you've probably seen the illustration of the article about a resume was submitted to a congregation who was looking for a preacher, and it was talking about that preacher, poor eyesight, health not what it should be, never stays in a place very long, has been threatened and put in prison more than once, and has been run out of town for preaching, considered controversial by some, on and on and on. And they said, there's no way. Well, we wouldn't want that guy to come here. They said, we've just rejected the Apostle Paul. But some people, if some people wouldn't like it if Paul was their preacher. So if they don't like you, don't feel bad about it. Some congregations don't provide adequate encouragement. You don't preach for the attaboys and we love you, appreciate you and all that, but you go 5, 6, 7 years and you never get any of that. You might come to think that's natural and expected, but typically, brethren will be encouraging. And we need that, one way or the other. In some places, a man's going to be overworked and underpaid. I know of one congregation, they thankfully have now changed this, but for years, it was a church of some size. They had a publication that went all over the brotherhood. They had a radio program. They had a school. They had, and the local man was expected to be heavily involved in all of that. Because they had a preacher who, I called his name, even though he's been long dead, you would know who he was. He started all that and did all that. He was at a different stage of his life, but they always wanted a family man, and that family man, it's hard for him, one man, to do that. Number 2, there's great worth to long ministry. Often it will be possible to stay. Here are some advantages to staying a place for a while. It usually helps the local church grow. It goes back to what Nariah said. The 3 places he could think of in the Caribbean where they've kept their preachers for some time are churches that have grown. I'm not saying that always is the case, but that's your better chance. If you're working and you're active and you're doing the work of an evangelist, it's going to grow. It also enables you to take your time to do your very best. Remember what we said, you can't get everything done in one day or 1 year. You need to be able to take your time to get things started. A third thing it does is it provides an opportunity to know people at their best and their worst. There's no shortcut to relationships. And the more intimate the relationship, the more apt it is that you're going to know not only the good but the bad. To see people at their best and their worst. And you need that. You need a well-rounded, reasonable, realistic view of the folks where you work. Number 4, it allows for long-range planning. Don't you want to do that when you go somewhere? You want to be a part of planning what's going to happen in 5 years, and then you want to be there to see how well you've gotten towards your realizing that goal. Number 5, it makes it possible for you to have a viable influence in the community. The longer you are in a place, and if you're out among the people, the more people that know that you're there, which provides more opportunities. And then it also provides you with a personal sense of achievement. I don't think there's anything. I'm proud of the fact that I was at Mechanicsville for 12 years. When we had our 50th anniversary here, Denny came up to me and he said, in the 50-year history of this congregation, you've been here the second longest time of any preacher in the history of this church. Well, that makes me feel good. There have been some great preachers that have been in this pulpit. And so I'm grateful for that. God gets the glory. It doesn't mean anything great about me, but it does make you feel good that you've been able to come and stay. All right, so how do you move to stay? How do you move into a place to stay? First of all, settle it in your heart. Number 2, take time to study. You keep your preaching meaty. You're not warming up sermons every 2 or 3 years. You know, the fact of the matter is, guys, if you change illustrations, you can preach your sermons more than once and people forget that you're preaching them. But you're feeding their souls, and if you've already preached that before, there's a whole lot left in the Bible to preach. So take time to study. Number 3, plan your preaching. This is what I'm getting you guys to do in those projects. By planning your preaching, you make your preaching more effective and more balanced. Number 4, love the people sincerely. You really do. They're not perfect, but you get to work with the best people on earth on the whole. They won't always be easy to love. We've met the congregation, and we saw some personalities that sometimes aren't the most pleasant. But just by and large, the rank and file of folks that you get to be around and work with are people that you can, if your heart is open, love sincerely. Now, when you love people, you open yourself up to risk. You know that. I mean, most of you've dated women that you didn't marry, and you might have even dated a girl that you just thought that you loved. She broke your heart. But it didn't keep you from staying in the process. Number 5, be available. If folks know that they can reach you, and talk to you, and spend time with you, it really makes it so that you want to and you can be there for a long time. Be flexible. You may have an idea of directing the work in one way, and then things come up and you have to take another direction. Be flexible. Next, learn to lose gracefully. Not every idea you propose will be accepted. There's a discussion about how something ought to be handled. Your way might not be the way that's accepted. Be supportive of the idea, that assuming it's scriptural, and it probably will be. Stand behind it. Be a cheerleader for it. Promote it. It makes a big impression on people. And I'll tell you, the guy that's teaching next door was really helpful to me on this. When we went through a time when some families left, you know, and another time when we had some little boys doing the counting, and I'm going, if we, you know, this can't be right. You know, don't be unduly startled by statistics. If you do your work, the church is going to grow. Certainly, I'd like to say a lot more about that. If you guys have any questions about beginning the work, we'll talk about it. But I think that really gives you a pretty good idea of what's involved in going somewhere and getting your work off the ground. All right, let's talk about ending a work. In my experience, this is a more difficult thing to do than beginning a work. I had a preacher friend of mine whose dad always bragged. His dad was a preacher too. He said, I always burn my bridges. When I leave a place, I make sure I torch it. And he did. I knew some of the places where he was. That's sad to me. We should, however a work ends, it should be such that when they have their 25th anniversary or whatever, they want to have you come back, or homecoming. That you can, when you're passing through that town, that you feel like you're welcome and it's not uncomfortable to go and worship with those folks. I don't know what drives that mentality, but there's some that have it. But a lot of it is tied to how well you end a work to go to somewhere else. Unless you're always leaving a work in controversy and strife, it will be heartbreaking to leave one work for another. The nature of my first and second works are very different, but I have to tell you guys, it was hard to leave both places. I might suggest that one was a good bit better than the other one. It was still hard to leave. We must choose to risk our hearts by loving people. We just mentioned that a minute ago. at every work where you go. Either you're going to leave, or you'll experience those that you come to love leaving. Every single work I've been involved with, both has happened. Except for here. I haven't left here. But here, and in Virginia and Alabama, people I loved and cared about left. Job transfers, death, going back to be with family, retirement, whatever, and they left. And that hurts. If you care about people, you hate to see them. On one level, you're going, I'm losing a worker. I'm losing somebody who is an encouragement to my work. But more than that, I'm losing that daily relationship that I had with them. And by the way, this is another reason why you don't close yourself off to only one or two families. Because that one or two families leave, you're not connected to the folks in that work. If you can, leave a work on a high note. Leave them wanting more. Leave them appreciating you and missing you. Not for any egotistical reason, but because it goes back to what we said a while ago. You want to leave it better than you found it, if you can. All right, so let's consider some thoughts about ending work. Number one, acquaint the church with the new man. It may be that before you leave, they've hired a new man. If you can, that's a good thing to do. It helps to smooth the transition. And if you believe that this is a sound, able man, help promote him to the church. Now, who's going to determine whether or not he's successful in local work? Him. But you can give him a good first step. That's the golden rule, isn't it? Wouldn't you want somebody to do that for you? So to kind of lay the groundwork, to pave the way. So you find yourself as a liaison to help to get that new man and that congregation working together. Number two, as you can see there, make a pledge to the old work to make the move as smooth as possible. Even if you're leaving under less than ideal circumstances, be a force for unity. You may have a philosophical issue with the leadership. Maybe even they're trying to press to do some things that aren't what they ought to be. You've preached about it. You've talked to them in meetings about it. And finally, you see each other saying, well, we're going two different directions. How do you leave that work? You get up and say, leadership is suspect. I just don't think I'm not even sure they're qualified. Well, what are you going to do to that work? It's still the body of Christ. You do your part and preach the truth and work wherever you have influence, but don't be divisive. Or maybe they say your preaching is a little too hard for us, or just a little too plain for us. So we think it's time for you to move on. Do it gracefully. Number three, when you go to leave, encourage and exhort the membership, as you can see, in a lot of different areas. Number one, encourage them to give the new preacher a warm welcome. Who thinks of that? Who thinks to say to the church, especially if they love you and they don't want to see you go, listen, Brother John Smith's about to come, and he's new to this area. And he doesn't know yet what a great church that you are. Why don't you show him, just as you've shown my family and me, that love? Because all I've heard of John Smith is, I've heard some great things. I think you're going to love him and care about him. You don't want the church to love you more than they love him. Well, what profit is that? What good is that for the church, especially? And again, it's the golden rule. Number two, encourage the congregation to write him a letter. Again, who thinks of that? But let's say you're John Smith and you're coming into that work and 50 people have sent you a letter. What does that do to you? What kind of attitude and impression do you have about that new congregation? And if you're John Smith, What are you going to do, man? You're going to roll your sleeves up and you're going to work harder than you've ever worked before. And guys, you're not looking for credit, but who's behind that? See, you're leaving that work better than when you got there. Encourage them to extend hospitality to the new preacher. I talked to a friend of mine who went to preach for a church in Tennessee, and he said, I was there 4 years, and he said, I was invited to the members' home once. People just don't, I don't know that congregation. Were they just closed off, or did they just not know any better? Or did they just not think? And that's still not excusable. But maybe it wasn't a malicious thing. Maybe it was just a thoughtless thing. But if you, when you leave, say, hey, open up your homes. Be hospitable. Take them out to eat. That makes a big difference. You know, that does not just include personal invitations. But what about group functions? But also, tell them in this same regard, with regard to hospitality, tell the congregation not to be offended if he says no from time to time. Maybe there's a conflict. It may be just not a good time. You don't have to explain it to the congregation, but to say it doesn't mean that he doesn't want to be a part of your life. Now, if he says no every time, that's going to be a different matter, and they'll figure that out. Encourage them to tell the preacher their names clearly and repetitiously, and give him and his family time to remember them. You know how that works, right? You go to a church of 100, there's 100 names for you to remember. How many for them? So the odds are in their favor. I had to tell you guys, and this happened here. We tried out on Easter Sunday, 2006, and a brother came up to me and told me his name. I came back, it was one of the first Sundays I guess it was the first Sunday I was here, and he came up to me and goes, "You remember my name?" And I try, sometimes names stick with me. I go, "I'm sorry," and I really do think he was a little bit offended. Now we've gotten to know each other, and you know, we can even laugh about that now. But really, to say, step back from that for a minute. How in the world am I supposed to, you're not even one of the elders, you know, and how am I supposed to remember who you are just like that, you know? So just remind the congregation, he's probably not have a photographic memory, so he's probably going to forget some of that.
A lot of that.
So, yeah. All right, next, encourage them to be cooperative. He's going to have different ideas. He's going to have a different personality, different strengths, different weaknesses. And so be cooperative with this new man. Here's an important one. Especially if the man who follows you has children at home. Encourage them to include the preacher's children with the young people. Encourage them not to be critical, especially if they loved you. It's going to be down to the fact that he parts his hair, or he doesn't have as much hair, or has too much hair, more than you, silly stuff like that. Now, maybe they'll never say it, but they might feel critical. Encourage them not to constantly refer to the former preacher, i.e., you. Because, guys, that's not something you want to hear. I mean, you put yourself in their position, that new guy's position. You don't want to hear about what the other guy always did. Encourage them to encourage him by complimenting his lessons. Because you can find something valuable in most lessons. Encourage them to be understanding of him and his family. They may be in a new region of the country, but at the very least, a new city. And then, of course, encourage them not to compare.
You think this would be good to cover in a bulletin or on the back of the bulletin, an article, or?
I think you can. It might even and you have to think of ways, maybe you can send a congregation a letter in which you can, instead of bulleting this, you can incorporate a lot of these ideas, you know. Dear brethren, we're going to be moving to Ironton, Ohio, you know, in a month. And Brother John Smith will be coming here from Broken Arrow, Oklahoma to be your new preacher. And, you know, as we prepare for his coming, it's an exciting time, you know, a fresh face, you know, maybe find some way to, you know, compliment him, you know, somebody, you know, who's got a great personality, whatever else, just, and then talk about some of these things. Here are some things that you can do to make his transition as smooth as possible. But I'd also mention that, as I spoke before, that's, you know, reinforce it if you can. Those are good things to do. I don't know if I have it in here. Yes, miscellaneous thoughts. Always, if it possible, lead graciously. Whether you feel the need or made to feel the need to lead, no matter if it's positive or negative, lead graciously. Be a big person. The temptation will be to be otherwise. After the break, I'm going to give you something that was done. If you guys are familiar with the Jenkins Institute, Dale and Jeff Jenkins put out, it's a good thing to subscribe to. Today they did something called You're Fired, Now What? And it's a top 10 thing to do in the wake of being fired. I'm going to give you that, and you can go in this section of your notebook if you're looking for a place to put it. And I think that's one of the main points they make is leave graciously when you have to leave. Number 2, don't leave with a sour grapes attitude. They didn't treat me right. Because sometimes that'll happen. Always see the overarching purpose of God. His sovereignty. God is forever in control. We have a better sense of that when things are going well. But even in a situation like this, when we have to go from one to the other, even if we're leaving by our choice, just remember that we're a tool in His hand. He's going to take care of us. Certainly things could have gone better most of the time. It could have gone worse. As we've already mentioned, leave so that you can return. And then fourth, remember the church is bigger than you are. I'll tell you something I've had to deal with. You may wrestle with guilt if the church struggles or goes backward after you leave. If you guys do all the things we talk about preaching is work. If you do a good work, if it's productive and it's top notch, and you have just really given them your time and your heart and your energy, and it's gone so well, and then you leave, and the next guy comes in there, maybe he doesn't have that same drive, determination, and maybe he's just not got the ability. And you go, and you're sitting at your new work, and maybe even especially if, because every day's not going to be rosy. You go to a new work, you go, well, maybe I should have stayed. Don't do that. Don't worry about it. Let that be in the rearview mirror completely. As you're sitting there and you go, or you're involved in your work, and somebody calls you and says, oh, man, Brad, since you've left, things have gone downhill. First of all, try to reroute that thing as much as you can. But not only that, you may be left after you get off the phone. Maybe you hear some things that are genuinely, this guy is a porcupine, and he is just, he's shattering a lot of the things that you worked for so long. You're sitting there going, I shouldn't have left them. Well, you can't do that. God's in control. Now, if you're overly ambitious, that's the other problem. But if you've evaluated leaving that work and going to that next work under the right bases, then yes, there may be some trouble, but it's not your fault. And always also remember this with regard to that. Every church has a number who are converted to the preacher and not to Christ. Now, we're doing everything within our power, aren't we, to make that not be the case? To not let their faith be attached to you. Try as you might, unfortunately. You know, I heard of that happening in the place where I left. I saw it happen here. The man that was here before me was a good man. He was here a long, long time. And then some people say, well, he's not here anymore. You know, I always liked him. You know, even in some cases, within a matter of a few weeks, they didn't know me. I didn't know them, but I wasn't Don. That'll happen. Now, hopefully they won't leave me completely, but sometimes that means they weren't truly converted to Christ in the first place. All right, one other thing. I don't think I have it in my notes here. How to resign. Let's let you know, I'm not exactly sure where I want to go next. So this is that last class where I got a lot of things to cover. How to resign. Mm-hmm. Usually, a letter to the elders or to the men. Did I give you guys a copy of the resignation letters? I think I did. I'm not telling you guys I did it perfectly, but there's some samples anyway of leaving two different places, two different works. One was to a business meeting, and the other was to an eldership. Be heartfelt, be sincere, be kind, be magnanimous, be generous and complimentary. There may be a need, in a very controlled manner, to be frank. But make the overwhelming tone of that positive. Make it easier for the church to move forward when you leave. I always tell the leadership first. Now, if they tell everybody in the world, that's up to them. Especially with an eldership, I'd say, brethren, I would tell them up front, I think it'd be better if I were the one to let them know. But if you, in your wisdom, think that you want to be the ones, then I leave that to your discretion. But if you can, and whatever they come up with, then you read a letter the following Sunday. You can't put it in the bulletin, but I always feel like it's the more manly thing to do to communicate to people. So that's the way I think you should do it. To me, a bulletin blurb is very impersonal and not indicative of a good relationship. But I can tell you, I don't care. If you put your heart into that word, it's going to be gut-wrenching. Every second is just going to just be an agony while you wait to tell them. And then you're going to hate telling them, and then you'll have to deal with the tears and the anger. People react in a lot of different ways when you resign. Even if it's a positive work, people are going to feel like you betrayed them or leaving them. Maybe the ones that are converted to you and not to Christ. But a lot of people will be warm and encouraging and loving and magnanimous. But you'll get the gamut because people are going to be raw. Especially if they didn't really see this coming. If it hasn't been a tumultuous work, it's been a good work, but you're moving on. But be graceful as you can be. All right, so we've dealt with the gamut. We've dealt with before you have a job, once you have a job, when you end the job. And all of that, are there any questions regarding that? Okay. All right, we're going off the PowerPoint here, but I want to deal with another matter here. This is visitation. And I begin this with we'll call it the problem of visiting. That's kind of negative. Not just the preacher and visitation. Let's call it that. Because it's not a problem. There are just some things we've got to be aware of. Number one, and I know, just remind me, I've got to slow down because you don't have PowerPoint here. Number one, there are a wide variety of opinions on this subject. One opinion is it's the preacher's job. In response, it is the preacher's job as a Christian to do some visiting though he's an evangelist. It is the preacher's job as a Christian to do some visiting, even though he's an evangelist. And we've already talked about why. I don't think we have to cover that ground again, do we? I mean, it helps make our work more effective is one thing, but it's the right thing to do. That's all you need to know. I believe the preacher is wise to take his wife. And if you have children in your home, at times you take them too. You know, children are always a good butler. I mean, you know, door knocking, they're great to have with you. I wouldn't take them on a church discipline visit. That's bigger. But take them on a hospital visit because, I don't know, they just help to cheer up. And they just really add a dimension to things. And you won't have that blessing all of your preaching life, but it will be one that you'll have at times. And if you have your grandchildren around, same thing. Under this first point, something else to consider is that the preacher needs the personal touch. The more he visits, the more he knows the church. And also with regard to this, if he does not do some visiting, he may not be well listened to from the pulpit. One other thing regarding this, keep in mind this. I'm probably going too fast on it at this point. Okay. The preacher cannot substitute for the entire church. But the church cannot substitute for him either. The preacher cannot substitute for the entire church. But the church cannot substitute for him either. That makes sense, doesn't it? You don't want the only visiting that's done be done by others outside of yourself, but you can't. The church is not going to be effective in its growth if you're the only one ever visiting anybody. All right, number two, we'll only have a chance to maybe introduce this. The bell's going to ring on us here in about 5 or 6 minutes. Number two, let's deal with the preacher and his personal visiting. There are 5 types of visits that the preacher should concentrate on. Any thoughts as to who these are?
Elders?
The elderly, the aged.
Aged elder, same.
Elderly. Yeah, not elders. I would put elders in another category. So the elderly or
And the aged.
That's one.
Same. Yeah, that's right.
Just synonymously spoken there. All right. What else?
Sick.
All right, sick and shut in. So number 1, the elderly. Number 2, sick and shut in. Who else? Prospects, non-Christian visitors. Number 3. All right, who else?
People that just moved in the neighborhood.
Delinquent.
All right, so you got both of them. New members is, because if they just moved to the area, I'd call that a non-Christian visitor. So we're talking about new members. They've just moved into, yeah. That may have been what you meant.
Yeah.
And then what Nariah said, members who are spiritually weak. They may not even necessarily be delinquent. They might still be showing up from time to time. And I think if you get your hands around that, your mind wrapped around that, you're going to be pretty effective in your visiting if you target those 5 areas. The spirit of kindness requires a preacher to visit the sick. Ephesians 4:32. as application in this regard. Be kind one to another. Right. New members need continual encouragement to grow. Well, we can be easily negligent of this month.
We're number 3.
No, we're still dealing with the preacher and his personal visits. I'm just kind of elaborating on those types of visits. We need to be mindful of the spiritually weak. They need guidance, and they'll appreciate it later. It's kind of the rationale behind all these visits. Am I right? Also, most people are converted where? Not at the church building. At home. So we need to be where conversion will take place. In their homes. And in visiting new members, we need to have a specific reason for that visit, don't we? So we're just there to encourage, say we're glad that they're there. Don't stay too long. That's my general rule for visits. You gauge it, but typically speaking, don't stay long. Yes, sir.
We're going to run out of time before you can answer this, I bet.
Nope. We'll just call that the last thing we do.
You show up, and it's obvious the person doesn't. I know my answer, but I'm seeking your input as well.
Sure.
You go somewhere, and it's obvious you're not. It's not that you're not wanted, but I really don't want you coming in and getting all cozy on the couch. Just hook me up at the door and then skedaddle.
Yeah.
How do you deal with that? I mean, you just deal with it.
I think you meet. And here's something. I've been doing this wrong, Brad, for 21 years. I just found out. A study just came out. I have prided myself on I always make unsolicited visits. Never have had an overtly negative experience. I think it has worked well, but statistically speaking, people in our culture today do not like that. I never knew. That kind of goes along with my personality. I'm the Labrador, you know. I'm pretty thick-skinned about that. I don't perceive that very well. If you're not wanting me there, you know, you might have to just hit me over the head with a 2x4 for me to know it. But that people like you to call ahead, and that means that you may not be able to make some visits because people may be stiff-arming you completely. I think you've hit it right. And what if every work's going to be different, every situation's going to be different, so you need to analyze that. But we are, as a whole, a busier people. And so people are always doing the next thing. They're always ready. And so that may not be personal against you, but it may be. And if you can read that cue, you go with that. And I always kind of like to lead with, I don't want to disrupt your schedule. I know you've got a lot going on. But a lot of times you go to the door and you'll get the cues quickly. If they're standing at the doorway, they're saying, don't come in. Now, if you call ahead, see, I don't have experience with that yet because I've been doing it the other way all these years. But Doug McNary and I went and visited a family that have now moved somewhere else. And we did we had to go downtown. They lived in one of those high-rise places. Went downtown and the girl at the door, and she was so embarrassed. The thing is, they both worked outside the home. Their house was a wreck. And she was embarrassed, and I could tell the whole time, even though they appreciated the visit, they placed membership in the area, and they were good members, active members here, I just couldn't help but feel such empathy for her because she was so embarrassed. She couldn't even hear what we were saying because she's looking at her house going, oh, I can't believe that my house is not fixed. But sometimes we met at the door, and you just go with that. We went and visited another person, and that's exactly how we were met. I think your instinct was right on. Is you just go with the cues that you're given, and then you work from that basis. All right, we'll have some more stuff about visitation, and then we'll see what we have time left to do after that. Just kind of back upstairs and get ready.
I have a visit.
Give you some more.
You're welcome, man.
I have a key. I could have entered one of them.
Definitely. This part should be fairly straightforward. we had dealt with all that I want to on preliminaries. Under visitation, this is what Scott's handing out, if he doesn't have it, is what I talked about from Jenkins, the Jenkins Institute. I think everybody, there should be one, somebody's hoping for, Chris Croach. There won't be much to tote, but that's the study guide final. That's what he'll need. He'll just drop it in his box, I guess, upstairs.
He didn't get stuck in traffic. It was Alicia's back.
Oh.
She get hurt?
Okay. Well, I'm glad it wasn't traffic related.
So he stayed home to watch the kids.
I got you. Yeah, I've had bad back before. I understand that.
Yeah, that hurts.
We're going to talk a little bit about hospital and nursing home visitation, and we'll give you some tips for how to do that. And then we'll consider that case closed, and then we'll do a couple of little other things before we get to the final. And then the thing is, if I don't get to the study guide before for the final, it's self-explanatory. But I'd like to give you a little time to ask any questions. All right. Number one, make the visit short.
This is hospital visits?
This is hospital and nursing home visitation. I'm going to give you a slew of tips. Number one, make the visit short. In many cases, there are always exceptions. About 5 minutes max. How that works, you come in, greet them, ask them how they're feeling, visit with them, encourage them, have a prayer with them. And here's why. You think, well, that's insensitive. Well, how many of you guys have ever spent time in a hospital as an adult? They're waking you up every 7.5 minutes. They're poking you, prodding you. You're tired. So there's rationale to that. In some cases, somebody's going to be lonely and they'll want you to stay. We'll follow that cue, but most of the time they'll be glad you came. You have let them know you care about them. You have stayed time efficient, and you have really done what you need to do with that visit. Number two, visit at an opportune time. Here's what that means. You may go and may get shut out. You realize the different things that can be happening. They may be bathing. They may be getting ready for a test. The food may have been delivered. And that stuff's not all that tasty anyway. You would want it hot at least, Sometimes the doctor's giving big news. Sometimes they'll want you to stay. Actually more times than not, the family is oh no, why don't you stay? But be prepared if you stay, depending on what the nature of their sickness is, you may hear stuff. It's not, you don't have to have a strong stomach as being a doctor, but you have to have a pretty strong stomach sometimes. But if you can, if there's private details, you just encourage them to say, hey, I'll be waiting outside, whenever the doctor's done. Especially if I felt the need to do that, I'd be proactive and get ahead of the curve.
I think you got some experience. You're not telling us about this.
No, I know. Yeah, you're lucky, Ed. We don't have any time for me to tell you. Number three, avoid statements like, I knew someone who had this and died. You know what? You say, well, what in the world are you telling us that for? Because I've been in the room when that's been said. And some people have had that slip out of their mouth. I forget, somebody was telling this story within the last week. I don't even know if it was a preacher, maybe it's been a member, but who said that. And they're like, oh, I was so mortified. You can't get that back. And if you'll have that in your mind ahead of time.
I can't believe somebody would say that.
Well, when there's somebody pregnant, what do? They tell all the horror stories. They have a root canal, every worst, case in history. So that's what we're prone to do. We just have to have a filter. Number four, be cheerful and upbeat. But speak softly. Avoiding loud talking and laughing. I don't have to repeat that. That's long. Be cheerful and upbeat. But speak softly.
Wait, what's the heading of this one?
These are all tips for hospital and nursing home visitation. So this is tip number 4, I believe, in my notes.
Yeah, what is number 4?
Be cheerful and upbeat. But speak softly.
What was 3?
Avoid statements like, I knew somebody who had this and died. To me, it's important enough it gets its own category. Because you could really submarine your efforts with that one.
Especially when you got a storyteller like
Puppy.
Yeah, with Charles, he's got uncommon common sense. So that's what's going to help him.
Uncommon.
That's right.
Hey, that's a lot.
Yeah, he's definitely uncommon common.
Well, I mean, a lot of folks, you know, that like to talk. You have to couple that with common sense, or you'll. What it's just, you know, in through the brain, out through the mouth, you know, and then trouble starts. Number 5. Do not suggest a sure cure or change in doctors or medication. Sometimes we don't know when we're out of our league. And even if we have a good bit of background and experience, that's not our role.
The doctor.
That's right. Let the doctor handle that.
Let the pro
Try this jumping bushman.
That's right. He won't come and preach your sermon for you, so don't you do his work.
Don't have a scalpel.
That's right.
That's got you the jumping bush.
Yeah,
We do our own surgery.
that's right.
Number 6, don't ask the trouble or condition the patient has. You can embarrass yourself and the patient. And some of this is just what the Larry King book that Will Handstein was talking about. You have to have something to say when you go make a visit, right? And so you'd be surprised at how the well can seem dry sometimes. And these are the kinds of things we might pump up to try to say in the conversation that this really needs to stay.
Every time I go in, they're ready to tell you what's going on.
That's a different story.
Details.
Yeah, it's going to be TMI for you, and you just have to deal with it. But don't you be the one that does that.
Ribbon 6.
Huh? Number 6, that's what we just did. Don't ask the trouble or condition the patient has. So what exactly has you in here?
That's almost the first question that people normally ask.
Well, the thing is, especially if it's a woman, you might get into some very sensitive areas there. And she's going to be embarrassed that you've even asked her, even if she doesn't tell you. It's best just to avoid that altogether. Or even if it's a man, it may be something he's embarrassed about. Number 7, don't express a lack of confidence in a person's diagnosis. I don't know about that. That doesn't look like this. I knew somebody had that. That's not how they looked at all. Jaundice, you don't look all that yellow. Well, a little bit, but I don't think it's jaundice. You know, again, it's not your place. You may be just trying to make conversation and be friendly. Number 8, avoid a funeral-like atmosphere.
Wow.
It's serious when we go, and you know, if you know the condition is terminal, in all seriousness, your demeanor is going to affect it. But even then, you're going to be positive, because the best is yet to come for them if they're Christian. And even if not, your role is to provide whatever comfort you can. You're not going to be able to baptize them in that situation. The best you can do is maybe do something that opens the door for somebody.
Don't ask them, who's making funeral plans?
Yeah. Which mortuary are you using? No, that doesn't really, that's not the right.
Because your casket going to be.
Yeah. Because here's the thing, they're going to already be afraid.
Oh, yeah.
They're already anxious. They're already depressed.
Will your husband remarry?
Don't feed them. That's the problem.
Stop it, Mary.
Number 9, leave with a cheerful statement. You hurry up and get well. We're looking for you soon. I know you're going to be right back at it. Can't keep you down. You know, it's something like that. So leave with a cheerful statement. Number 10, when someone is in pain or very ill, don't expect them to converse. I'll repeat that. It's kind of a long statement. When somebody is ill or in pain, don't expect conversation. I've had patients to throw up and to pass out when I was in the room with them. It's just, it doesn't happen very, very often at all, but that gives us a reminder they don't feel good or they wouldn't be here. And if the patient is very, very ill, this is just still under this number 10, just stand with the family in silence. You may want to engage in some quiet conversation in the hallway. Remember your role. You're there to provide provide comfort, to be a presence. Because when they see you, you represent the church, and that represents a lot of memories and fond feelings they have, hopefully. If you represent the preaching that you do, again, you're representing the spiritual part of their life. Number 11, assure the patient of your continued interest and prayers. When you're scared and you have a condition, you're stuck there, it's amazing how much confidence and comfort that gives you.
Kind of that the whole church is praying for you.
That's right. Yeah, assure them of others' interest in prayers. You know, I do a lot of going there. I say, "Hey, don't you know we've prayed for you the last 5-6 times we've been together?" Wow. Well, that says I mean something to you, and it means that there are a lot of people who are taking my problem to the throne. Well, that means a lot. See, what these are things that you might not think of, but if you think of them and say them, can make a positive difference. We're wanting that time that we're spending to be spent in the most productive way possible. Number 12, I believe, don't walk into a patient's room when the door is closed.
That seems like a no-brainer.
It does seem like one. But you know what? Sometimes you're not visited by yourself. And you might have the bull with you, the one that likes to go in the china shop. So you got to be careful. Because you might just go busting in there and who knows what he'll find on the other side.
Yeah. This is something you want to see.
All right. Number 13, don't wake a sleeping person. So what do you do if they're asleep?
Leave a note.
Leave a note. They wake up and then that lets them know you were there.
Charles.
Number 14, make it a practice to leave a card on a table or desk. Leave a card on a desk. Or, the little tray table they have there. If it's not overly cluttered or already being used for something else, if there's a space, put it there. That's been very helpful with people who aren't Christians. You go by and you see them. And it's good to say, hey, if you need anything, give us a call. Of course, what you can do is you can be preemptive and bring a little goodie bag. Go to Big Lots or the Dollar Tree and get a puzzle book and a cheap pen. I mean, you get for $3 or $4, you can give them a little to keep them occupied. If they're a guy, if you can find a decent sports magazine that's not filled with all kind of immodesty and stuff, or whatever. Just give them something, or a gardening book magazine. Whatever their interests are, leave it with them. Leave a card. That way they can call you. They know they have it there. Number 15. Talk with the patient about pleasant things only. A lot of this is just opinion and hopefully common sense and judgment. But they've proven to be workable. Let me give you some examples of some things, because really that's what can happen sometimes, especially if you don't know them very well, as you might not know what specifically to talk about. So let me give you some examples.
Examples of what's talked about?
Yep. These are some examples of pleasant things to talk about. And you know the situation. So some of these may not be pleasant topics. Like number 1, children. I mean, it should be, but sometimes it's not. And if you don't know, when in doubt, leave it out. Parents, children, parents, friends, church, the weather. I mean, this would be a perfect day. Go in there and say, "Wow, I can't believe it. I was surprised by this stuff. We sure need it, especially around here. Never lived in a place where moisture is such a big deal. I used to be in a place where you get 40 or 45 inches a year.
It's dry over here.
Yeah, so we're always grateful for the moisture. And I've come to appreciate that, living here. The flowers in the room. Oh, who sent those? Oh, those are pretty. Or if you know them, roses, those are your favorites. Or rhododendrons. Oh, you don't see those in an arrangement every day. Especially if you're reaching, I guess you do that. Their interests and hobbies. That's where where if you know, remember we said be a well-rounded man as a preacher? You come in and they have it on the Rockies game, you know that they're probably a sports fan, man or woman. I mean, I've seen a lot of women having a football game on. Well, that's right down my alley. You know, that'll give me 2 or 3 minutes right there without even trying on it. Or if they have it on Fox News, well, you know, they're interested in the politics of the day. You don't have to get into the nuts and bolts. And you say, oh, who's that? What's he talking about? Or what's going on? You know, so and then let them drive it.
But that might open up a big can of
It
worms.
might not be pleasant. You know, it just depends.
You don't know who
Use your
that is.
common sense.
Let me tell you who that guy is.
That's right.
I can hear her. And
And don't say I voted for him.
Yeah.
That might be a bad thing. How soon he hopes to be discharged? You know, that can be done this way. So how long they saying you're going to be in? Okay. All right. Yeah, then that's a little bit of thing there, but it just allows them to talk about it. Number 16. And that's where I have it. Is that jive with your list? Don't engage in long conversations with other visitors. Especially over the top of them. That's just, you know.
Repeat that again.
Don't engage in long conversation with other visitors.
Isn't it amazing, Neal, how there's always courtesy and etiquette in everything we do?
Everything we do. That is exactly right. You know, one of the first school lectureships I spoke on was at Faulkner University, and my topic was be courteous. 1 Peter 3 and verse 8. And I thought, but that was a long time ago, so culture's changed some. But when I got to studying that, I mean, you know, you think about road, you know, in the obvious ways like road rage and Facebook rage or whatever else there is, you know, there's all that. But there's also just the little things that we don't do that keep courtesy from showing. And Peter says, finally, brother, be courteous to one another. So that's exactly right.
Is that 1 Peter 3:8?
I think so.
what was that? Missed it.
What the last one? 16, don't engage in long conversation with other visitors. But number 17, if they're in a semi-private room, remember the other patient. I think it's only 10 seconds, but that might be an opportunity.
What was that point again? I'm sorry.
That's okay. And you know, to say in a semi-private room, if they're in a private room, they won't have another patient. But remember the other patient. And it's just the basic. Sorry that you're having to be in here. I hope that you're not in here very long. If there's anything we can do, leave them a card. They may have been looking for a church home before they were put in there.
Yeah, they're kids. When I was visiting my grandma at the nursing home, they were always.
Hey, and think about this. Aren't they in a place of need?
Yeah, oh yeah.
And aren't people more responsive when there's need?
Yeah.
And even in a nursing home where that might seem to them to be the final solution, they might not be getting out of there. You know, look at what JJ and Lila do, remember? And how they have 2 members from the Sunrise facility they bring with them every Sunday. You know, so there's fruit to be found on every tree. Well, on many trees anyway. Metaphorically. Number 18, make the visit personal, not professional. So we're talking about your manner. What that means is be sincere and genuine. You know, that's kind of another way of the whole preacher persona. Don't put on that persona. Make them know that you care and that you really want to see them. I realize that there'll be some that will be more enthused to see than others. But you care about them and at some level as a Christian. And so convey that care. Number 19, talk about the Bible while there. That's what makes what you bring, you know, specific and special. And if you're filled with the Word, it's going to come out. Then here's one. If you carry your Old Testament with you or a smaller Bible, read from the Bible. That's kind of like one of those, I'll mention next. That's one of those things that most people won't refuse. Now, you might, if you know somebody's agnostic or atheist, don't giggle, in the Bible. That's not the time.
But you should ask them, right?
Brad.
Absolutely. Would you mind, and that's how I always preface that, would you mind if I read a passage to you? It always brings me comfort. And let me give you some good places to read from in a situation like this. Romans 8. Anywhere in Romans 8. Psalm 46. Psalm 61. Some of these will be tailored toward, you'll look at these passages and say this is better for a Christian, this is better for a non-Christian. Matthew 7 to 11. Philippians 4 to 8. There's several good passages in Ephesians chapter 3, like 17 through 20. Good section. First Peter 5 to 7. And then there's a sample. You can find some probably even more relevant. Now, we may have mentioned this last one, number 21. Pray with them. I have never, ever offered to pray with anybody, and I have visited people of all stripes. I have never been refused. Now, maybe if their condition's not so serious and I'm there, they know they're going to recover, they might have a different feeling. But I haven't found them yet. Everybody always wants you to pray with them. It's almost that there's no atheist in a foxhole kind of a concept. All right, that's all I have on visiting. Any questions or comments about it? All right, let's do a little unit called The Preacher in Little Things. Let me just give you a few of these. Encourage other people. That way, you help people from feeling neglected. And it brings you great joy. So encourage other people. Number 2, have the young men conduct the service. Well, that's a great way to develop tomorrow's leaders. And as a part of this, guys, you'll be here to see Mark introduce something in a couple of months, and you're probably familiar with it. But periodically have Timothy classes and pew packer classes. Do you kind of know what I mean by Timothy class? You've been familiar with that? Where you teach them how to sing, lead singing, how to lead prayer, how to wait on the Lord's table. You give them ideas of prayers for the bread, the fruit of the vine, a prayer for the giving. Give them a chance to do a little talk, to read Scripture. And depending on the age of the guys, if they're teenagers, you can expect a little bit more of them and have them all preach, maybe a 5-minute lesson. Here's what you do. When you do that is you don't have a situation where you have a guy who's sitting on the pew, he's 40, he's grown up in the church, and he's petrified to get up and preach. Because he's done it before. When you have Wednesday night invitations, if you have a devotional period and like the 90 seconds like you do, that's a great way. A lot of guys are giving their first lessons in that setting.
What are we talking about?
We're talking about having the young men conduct the service. But under that, we were talking about Timothy class. I was explaining what that was. Encourage the young men.
This is the preacher and little things. Scott.
Yeah, there's a whole, you walked out before that little unit.
You know,
I understand. No, that's not a reprimand.
You know, that's an excellent idea about Timothy class. When I was little, we always called it leadership training class.
Mm-hmm.
But
men's training class, boys training class.
Yeah.
Same thing.
Yeah.
And a pew packers class is what Mark's going to introduce here. You've
never heard of that.
Okay. Well, you pack a pew with little kids, and you give them Bible facts, and you sing songs like, Jesus, and that will pay dividends. I wish I had time to talk about that. You have, look the good it does those little kids. A lot of times their parents come and sit right behind them, and guess who's learning too? A lot of times their parents. Get the teens involved. That lets them see that Christianity is not about just being served and having youth devotions for them. It's about them being able to help others. It does a lot of good. And it builds the knowledge of those little kids. That's a little foundation that they can draw back on at a later period in life. So it's not such a little thing. You'll notice all these little things aren't really little at all. Number 3.
One more thing, Neal.
Yeah, sure.
On that Timothy class, for instance, what do you suggest? A Wednesday night class, or is this during the week class, or how do you schedule that?
I have done that different ways. I have done it like, say, 5 o'clock on Sunday.
Oh.
And then have it, and the Pew Packers class is a little different. I like to abut that to the evening service. And maybe even take away from a few minutes from the evening service. And then, and another thing I didn't mention is when you have that Pew Packers class, have it close to service time, because here comes the members are filing in, and it does them some good. Name the judges. Well, a lot of members can't name the judges, but I have a song for that. So you sing through the song for the judges, and now you got the little old lady who's been in church all her life, and now she knows the name of the judges. Because if we sing it, we'll remember it. Most everybody's that way. God made us that way. So it does that good too. But Pew Packers will be right before Sunday evening services. Timothy class could be in place of. We did that here. We had it on Sunday morning for a quarter. We did it that way. Done it on weeknights. So, number 3. Pick up an elderly man and pal around with him. I don't know how else to put that. I was trying to think of what way I can dress that up, but adopt an elderly man. That's yeah. But you go by, you eat with him, take him to lunch, because especially a widower or a guy who I mentioned a guy earlier in the quarter whose circumstances changed and he was forced to retire early. He was macular degenerate and smoked eyesight at some point. Write letters to fellow preachers to encourage them. We have so many means to do that. You think about that. You can drop them a Facebook inbox message, email them, write them a note and send it to them. As long as the post office is still in operation. And think about that. You pick up your mail, you open up, there's a letter from somebody maybe you don't even know. Say you saw an article in Gospel Advocate and you go, brother, that was such an encouraging treatment of Philemon. That's going to help me. And the way I treat people who are disenfranchised in the congregation here, I thank you for, and look, take 5 lines, 1 minute, drop in the box, and I'll tell you what, if he's like me, I have a place where I keep those letters, especially when they're out of the blue and you don't know them. See what you've done? You've helped the kingdom, and you've not left your local work, and if they ever meet you, you've already made a good first impression. That's not why you do it, but that's one of the things that can happen. Write letters to your members for no reason.
That's 4.
And letters just because.
Just because. And you're not struggling, so far as I can tell. Of course, you might. Here's what happens. They may be, and you don't know it. They might be the duck on the pond, very calm on the surface, but churning underneath. And when you write them a letter, that makes a big difference. Akin to that, number, what is this, 5 or so? Don't forget to write thank you notes to members who do little things. Family does the communion. They're serving as greeters. They picked up somebody and brought them to church. I mean, something you never think anybody would say anything about that. Write or call members of former congregations when death occurs. Remember that whole thing about leaving gracefully? This is one of the things that you could do. Now, you're surely hoping you're not showing up the present preacher. If he's doing his work, you're not. But that's something nobody expects. Let me just round it out by giving you some examples of some little things. I just call this point, don't forget the little things. Here's some examples. Encouragement, publicly and privately.
Is writing for my members?
Now this is where you are in the congregation where you are.
Oh.
This is just kind of a summary point. Cards and notes. How about a smile? That can make the biggest difference. What a reminder that we need to smile more. I think about that. Like right now, I'm smiling on the inside. I don't think I am on the outside, but we need to do that. And if you catch somebody's eye and you smile at them, that's a little thing. Oh, it makes a difference. Folks leaving on vacation. That really makes an impression when they come back and go, well, how was your vacation? Oh, wow. You don't want to seem like a creeper or anything, like you're in their business, but if it comes up and they say, well, we're leaving today, and you remember that, and you tell them when they come back. How about kids who do well in sports or school activities? I saw your son finish 5th in the wrestling tournament. Well, nobody else probably said anything to him about that, especially since there's only 6 kids participating in it.
When they get their permit.
That's exactly right. See, those kinds of things. And as you think of those little things and what they are, that's a big day in the life of a kid.
You never know the impression you put in their heart. 20 years later, they can still remember
That's right.
that one little thing somebody said.
And it makes them more subject or prone to hear you. And that's what we're trying to do, be heard. We spend all the time preparing those lessons. Those are the kinds of things that we do. Send letters to shut-ins. They never see anybody or hear from anybody. Hopefully they are from you, but just I know you lost Alvin 5 years ago, and it's still tough for you, and whatever else. Remember anniversaries of big days. It's what one of the things that was it Dave or Will was talking about. Oh, in Stafford Northbrook, it was Will. If you remember the first anniversary of the death of somebody in the congregation to their spouse, I know you lost. I haven't always remembered to do this, but I remember the first time I did it here was Liz Cook. I don't know if you know who she is. I preached Dutch's funeral. And it was in the winter, I remember, because we had a snowy winter first year I was here. So I just happened to find it on the calendar. And I just sent her a note and said, I know you lost Dutch a year ago, and I know it's still hard. Everybody grieves differently at their own pace. And just let us know we're thinking about you. My wife's really good about that. Boy, she hits those things. That's little things. You can't quantify them. You line up preacher A and preacher B, and they preach about the same, and they do most of the things about the same way. A lot of times the difference is the little things that nobody sees.
Usually one of them is more personal.
That's right. See, that's what these are. These are touch points. These are connections. And that's what makes our work effective as preachers. The more of those we have. And then send notes to encourage and uplift members. I think I kind of encapsulated that earlier. All right. One other little unit to deal with, and then what I'll do is, if I've been traveling kind of fast, and I realize that, and we don't have PowerPoint. So after this next little unit, we'll go over the study guide, and if I give you a little time back, then that's okay. What I'm going to do is I'm going to bring in a packet of things we didn't get to. And you can put it in your notebook. Things like the preacher in church growth, the preacher in evangelism. I developed this course when I had 8 weeks. I have 7 weeks. So there's a whole week's worth, 6 hours of material I just can't get to this time. Planning events, but it's all going to be right there, and you'll have access to it. You won't be subject to it on the final. There'll be material you can keep. And I know it was all blah, 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 not on the final, blah, blah, blah. So I understand that. But just let you know you won't have it.
You always perk up with it.
Yeah. You will not be tested on it.
I like it.
All right, but everything today is fair game. So let me get in one other thing that'll be just very briefly dealt with. And this is baptisms. Number one will be handling public responses for baptism. Now here's the thing that we've been talking about, is you know the congregation, you know, like when I preach on Sunday morning, I know who is a prospect, I know who's a non-Christian, I know who's not been living, I know all those kinds of things. So when they're in the, number one under that, when they're in the pew, look at them. Don't stare unmercifully. Let's say Scott's a non-Christian and I'm preaching. And if I'm preaching on baptism, I'm not going to just burn a hole in his head by just staring him down. Because that's not going to. He's going to say, we can justifiably say, oh, you're just preaching at me. But we don't aim our preaching at anybody. But as you're going through the course of discourse, and there are people who you know that is for them, don't shy away from them. It didn't take very long just to preach at them, and then just come back to them and then continue preaching. They know that you and they have been having that monologue that is for them. So look at them. Now, number two under that, when they start coming down front, walk toward them. See, we're talking about this is an extension of little things. Here's something I had to work on, and again, I had a wife that helped me with that. I'm trying to give you that information. You may have that very thing. I had to deal with, not meaning to, but not being as warm with a response as I could be. And it wasn't intentional. It was just I didn't think about it. So if somebody's coming forward and they know what I do, I come out and I meet them. And I'm gonna embrace them. Because it wasn't easy for them to do that. And so I want to encourage them in that. Now, it happens different places. Here, the elders handle the responses. It's about half and half. Now, there have been some special occasions when they've wanted me to handle the response. In Virginia, it was about half and half. Half the time I did it, half the time I did it. So you probably will find yourself in a situation where you handle the response. So what do? You take their response and reassure them. Again, this is just for me. Maybe this isn't for you. Watch your face. Be pleasant and happy. Because whatever they're coming for, and it may involve a lot of pain, they're taking the right step. And they need to see in you that you recognize that they've done the very best possible thing in their circumstance that they could have done.
I don't know that there's anything more joyful.
That's right. Luke 15 is screaming at us. There's more joy in heaven over one sinner that repents. I mean, there's you can't quantify how great that is in the 99 that don't need repentance. Or there's joy in heaven, joy among the angels in heaven, and over it goes. When taking their confession, when they come to be baptized, watch your posture. And we're dealing mostly with baptism responses. Again, this is something I've learned to do. Put your arm on their shoulder. Don't be overly affectionate, but be affectionate. Be warm. Because you know what you do? You set the tone for those who are sitting in the pews. You set the tone for the one responding. Hey, this is a big deal. This is wonderful. This is happy. And you also set the tone for somebody who may be contemplating the same decision. And we're better about this as a culture, but I've lived long enough where I've seen somebody comes forward and we sing "Oh Happy Day," that fixed my choice. And we're like, and the preacher's just real stiff, and don't know what to do. And the congregation follows suit. We act like we're a bunch of nervous mice. We don't know how to handle the situation. Be warm. This is great. This is the most important decision anybody will ever make. We set the tone in there. All right. Number 2. So you start in the water first, and then help the other person, the candidate, for lack of a better term, help them into the water. There are two reasons why. One's probably pretty obvious, isn't it? Why do you want to be the one in there first and then be there?
It's very cold.
Huh?
Because it's very cold.
Well, yeah, I guess I hadn't thought about that. Most of the time, depends on where you are, what the circumstances are. It could be something that's an issue. But I'm thinking more of safety. If you're baptizing a 60, 65-year-old woman, you want to be up there to grab her hand and help her down. Because those steps can be very slippery. They don't have those little grips on them especially. You just want to make sure maybe they're unsteady on their feet, maybe they have a condition. But another thing is modesty. Now, there's not a whole lot you can do, but you want to make sure that, I'll tell you, one time we baptized a young woman, and you have no control over who helps somebody get ready for that baptism. And it's like it is here. You have, sometimes we patchwork what garments we have, that they can change into. I love those gospel advocates. If you're ordering and you have the ability, order those blue, like the vinyl ones, or whatever, nylon, I guess they are, because they maintain modesty. But they brought her out in one of those same kind of garments, but it was white. And it was a little bit threadbare. And I mean, it wasn't, but it was more transparent.
Sure.
And that's fine before she was baptized. But I didn't know, but I had an idea that when that thing got wet, then it was going to be a bad thing. So what I did, this isn't easy. After I baptized her, as soon as she got in the water, I put my head up. I let her up because she was a fairly attractive girl. I tried to position her so her back was to the audience without looking, and then guiding her back that other way. Now, there were enough people present who saw that first of all, they're going to see hopefully your heart's in control, you're in control of your heart. But number two, you're being an example, and so you're protecting that modesty. For the audience, for her, even if she doesn't have that compunction on her own, and from yourself. So, if you're there ahead of time, I think that helps a lot. Number three, what about your posture in the baptistry?
Say that again.
What is your posture in the baptistry? Now, probably all you guys have baptized at least one, and probably several. But there's some things I like to do to keep that person at ease. A lot of folks, a surprising number of people are scared of the water. I had a couple people tell me that's why they hesitated to obey the gospel. They were afraid of the water. So you never know what's going through somebody's head. And plus, baptism is a trust issue, isn't it? They're trusting you with themselves that you're going to be able to do that. So if you let them know what's happening, that gives them confidence in you. So that keeps nervousness down on their part. What you may have to do is get the person to step up. Well, here's what I'm talking about. Here, you're in the baptistry, and they may stop midstream. And they're 6'2". Well, that's not going to work. You're going to hit their head on that third step. So just walk them. So let's come over here, get them over here. And then it's just the things, if you don't think about it, you can have an issue, a problem. So you may have to move them up. And then just before you lower them, here's a recommendation of what you can say. Number one, remind them of what's being done. It's good to say what you're about to do. It does two similar things. It gives them reassurance. They're taking care of their sin problem. And you're going to baptize some who are more youthful. I'm not saying they're too young. They might be 12, 13 years old. And they may know exactly what they're doing. But when they're 24, they may go, I'm not sure I knew what I was doing. But this helps with doubt going down the road. Number three, have a prayer with them or for them afterward. And I really do believe in that welcome circle. I didn't come up with it, but it really, it adds emphasis to how important this occasion is. Getting married is the second most important thing that they do. And we buy, special clothes, and we have a reception, and you send out invitations for that. I'm not saying we do all that for baptism, but we do what we can to show them this is important.
Neil, have you ever seen where someone being baptized just kind of because of water in the nose issue? Have you ever seen it to where someone just collapses their knees and they just go straight down, and the baptizer kind of guides instead of
Instead of being the one to initiate, he
Yeah.
has to respond. I haven't. I'm going to talk about procedure, and that may help somebody.
Oh.
I've never had anybody collapse on the baptistry. And the one thing that helps in this whole situation is, I don't know how, there's at least some truth to the fact that weight is displaced in water. And so you can be 105 pounds, and you can baptize a woman or a man that's 250, 275 pounds, or 300 pounds. I can't remember who the biggest person I baptized is, but more than I could lift over my head for sure. And so, but that's, I'll talk about procedure here in just a second. In fact, let's deal with it now. Procedure. Procedures, baptism to me is about two things: leverage and hands. Let's talk about leverage. If you stand behind them, you're going to have a fulcrum. You're going to have the leverage that you need. There's different ways to do it. In the Pacific of California, they have a baptistry where, I don't know, I'm sure it's other places where the baptistry is right here, and then there's a place for a man or the person to stand on the outside, and they can take them, and they have a lot more control. You know, I just don't, I'm not as comfortable with that, but it seems to work. And sometimes they use two people, one on either side, take them down, bring them up, you know. And they tell them to get on your knees, or and we'll baptize you forward. It doesn't matter if you go buried head down or head up, you know. So the other thing is hands. This is the most important part, perhaps. And maybe if I show you, it'll help. I don't know how to put this in your notes. I get the person to take. Now I'm. What is this? Is this right-handed? I'm right-handed. I'm left-handed, but I lead in baptism with my right hand. So I have them on this side of me in the baptistry. I have them on, as I'm standing looking at them, I have them on the right side of the baptistry so I can take them down to their left. All right? So what I do is I tell them to take your left hand and pinch your nose. Okay? So that's going to take care of water getting in the nose. Because I'll show you what happens next. And I say, take your right hand and grab your left wrist. All right, so here's what it's going to look like right here. Now, if you'll notice, this is what that sets up for me. I got one hand behind them, and I got my other hand on that right hand, right here. And so I've got them both ways. And I tell them, I said, as I walk them through, take your left hand and pinch your nose. Take your right hand and grab your left wrist. I'm going to grab your other hand, so that'll lead. I'm going to have my other hand behind you. And so when I press on your right hand, just bend your knees a little bit, and I'll take you right down and right back up. And I'll tell you, it alleviates a lot of stress or fear of people. Because, you know, somebody's afraid of the water going up, you know, and if I've got their hands, that's usually the way they panic is with their hands. Sometimes with their feet. But if you have their hands, they're not really as tempted to, they want their feet on the ground. They don't want to let those loose, you know. So even if they're flailing, they're not. If they're prone to flail, if you have their center secured, they're going to be fine. And you'll be confident. Now you may not. I don't know. I haven't figured out how to keep myself dry. But that's okay. But you just want to make sure that they're under control. One time we had need enough water. When you don't have enough water, a lot of things can be an issue. We had a fellow that was afraid of the water. He's about 6'2". I mean, it was a very little bit of water. And it's hard to make somebody confident because you have to go so much further down to baptize them. And so we had and we had Hawkeye on the step up there going, oh, finger came out, do it again. Oh, his toe came out. You know, so we had to baptize him 3 times before we finally got him completely buried. It's hard to bury somebody with a spoonful of dirt, you know. So that was the problem. Well, there's more we can say. Obviously, you're going to teach your new converts, and there's some things you can do. Keep your baptism clothes and towels laundered. Who does that? Don't let your pride get in the way as a preacher and preacher's wife. It may be something you have to do. What a great problem, having wet and dirty baptismal clothes. And then, of course, things like make hair dryers and mirrors available. Hopefully that's already in place, but sometimes it's not. All right, just a little something to throw in there. Any questions or thoughts about baptisms?
You think if a baptizee went straight down or face first, that somebody in the audience would wonder if they were baptized?
Probably.
Because we're so used to seeing them go back on their
Yeah,
back.
that's the problem with traditions, things that can be done more than one way. If they see them done one way for so long,
Yeah,
they begin to think that's law.
right.
That might be a good teaching opportunity if you do that.
Yeah.
Of course, I don't have any reason to do something different just for the sake of being different.
Mm-hmm.
But there's nothing wrong with that to say, so we know the Bible doesn't instruct. That's kind of generic and specific authority. There's a specific command, but what's not specified can be generalized. You see, so if posture in baptism is not specified, so as long as we carry out the command, as long as what we do doesn't violate or add to, put in a different category of the command, then we're allowed to do that. And I baptized a fellow. I was in college in Alabama, a big guy. We didn't have a lot of water in the baptistry; it was leaking. And so we got it up to a certain point. So what we had to do is I had to get him on his knees. Now the thing is, it's a little harder to keep the fulcrum where you need to, but with him on his knees and me behind him and stooped over, I got him down head first and back up. Maybe a little more water in their nose, even with pinching. But that's, of course, it was just a few of us there because we didn't have any baptismal clothes. So it's a long story. So he was in his skivvies. So that happens sometimes, and you just, it shows you that there's no one way to do it. All right, here's our study guide. Let's just talk about it real quickly. I'll give you Chris's if that's all right. And then there you go. Just add to the bottom, number 25. Just be broadly familiar with this baptism. I revised this, but I never could get it completely. I didn't know I'd have time. All right. Part 1 of your exam will come from the Man of God book, the second half of the book. It's an open book, done the same exact way as the midterm. And you'll have, again, we'll gauge it. If it's unreasonable, but I don't think it will be. Most of you guys were right there in the middle of the target. So we'll have about a half hour. Part 2 is before. We'll be closed book, multiple choice, listing, true, false, and short answer. Know the suggestions for acquiring a religious library. Be familiar with at least 5 items of content of a good library. It'll be in your notes labeled. Familiar with the content regarding how you retain your library. 5 types of visits on which the preacher should concentrate. We dealt with that today. Hospital and nursing home visitations, know at least 10 suggestions as given. I think I gave you 21. Know at least 5 suggestions in a multi-team relationship for working as ministers, part of a local team. 5 problem areas of marriage in our RCS. The valuable suggestions for marriage, that's the list, having devotion from the first night. Make sure that you remember the little things. There's a big long list you'll see. I gave you 12 listening blocks, know at least 4 of them and what they are. Remember rehearsing, filtering, those kinds of things. Know the main points of office ethics. Be able to define balance and normal as we discussed it in class. Be familiar with the main points of the lecture, the preacher and people. Remember, it's all about sick people. It's all about young people. All about lost people. And then there's like 6, I think. Define administrator. I gave you a couple of definitions of that. The 5 tips for success in it. familiar with the 14 points of meeting the congregation, what to do at the funeral, before and during and after. And then just be familiar with that interview lecture that we had the other day and finished today. Suggestions for getting a new work. Incidentally, guys, don't let this melt you out. I say 10, you won't have that many, but be familiar with that. Encouraging the members with the new man that comes to work with them. Some areas to develop in the preacher-elder relationship. The preacher in little things. And I've just kind of redundant there. We already mentioned visitation. Be familiar with that and baptism. All right. Anything else from your notes to be fair game for extra credit? And there will be extra credit on the test.
I didn't get that on number 18 about the graveside.
I had some don't preach the another funeral sermon. Do you remember that? There's like 4 points. Yeah. I didn't bring it with me. There's should be like 4 points.
I think there was. Yeah, and I remember that first one, and I didn't get the rest.
Okay. I don't know if any of you other guys got that. You can check. You don't have that either?
Nope. Walk in front of the casket's all I got for graveside. At
Okay,
graveside.
well, walk, right, still like you have it between you. Walk in front of the casket. What did you have? And don't reproduce don't preach a long sermon. Keep it brief.
Visit with the family.
Yeah, visit with the family.
You can leave early if you want.
Yep, you stand aside and then you leave early. That's the list. So you sounds like Nariah has it. So check with Nariah.
Oh, because I have space.
All right. Any other questions about it? You guys have already been through one of my tests, and you all did well. So I don't think you have any problem. Just approach this the same way as you did the other. Any other questions about it? We'll have more to do on Thursday, but I want you guys to know I appreciate it very much. I've enjoyed teaching you. You've been a very good group, and I'm excited to see what the Lord's going to do with you. But we'll be back together on Thursday. Oh, something I need to cover. I have all 3 of my seniors here, don't I?
Yeah.
Okay, we need to start looking at when you're going to preach your senior sermon, because I think my first 3 weeks of April are now taken care of. So I would need you to preach the last Sunday in April night and the first 2 Sundays of May in the evening. So that's the last 3 weeks of the last quarter of your school. So first 2 Sunday nights of May, the last Sunday night of April. So it's first come, first served. Whenever you figure out what you want to do, let me know, and I'll have you penciled in upstairs on the schedule. So you can tell me now, you can tell me later. It's up to you.
Last Sunday in April and first 2 Sundays in May.
You converse with each other's schedule. Just come by and meet his office, and then I'll put you in.
Like the second week in May, right?
You want the last one?
Yeah, because I preach all those weeks in between. That way I don't have to preach 2 times.
Okay.
Because I no problem with preaching 2 times, but I have to drive.
Yeah. So
I don't get to go over my sermon like that.
all right. So if y'all have a preference, I can go.
So
ahead.
that's all right with you guys.
That's fine.
Well, it's first come, first serve. So you hope it is.
Charles, it doesn't matter to me.
Okay. Does it matter to you?
March, April.
It's first 2 Sundays in May. Well, actually, the first Sunday in May or the last Sunday in April. And it's in the evening.
In the evening.
So the last Sunday in April or the first Sunday in May?
I'll take the first one.
The April one? Okay, so you'll go in the middle, right?
Okay.
All right, thanks, guys.